Today's episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast is brought to you by Toro Australia, and more specifically their new 60-volt Revolution Professional battery tool lineup. If you're interested in that, more about it later in the podcast. Thank you, Toro Australia. All right, welcome to today's collab episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast and Plants Grower here with Daniel Fuller. Welcome, Daniel Fuller.
Thank you very much, Luke. It's a pleasure to be here. I guess it's the horticulturists and gardeners unite in this episode, so it's going to be fun.
It is. So what this is, I didn't tell you, it's a battle to the death. Whoever wins gets the other person's podcast. It's like a pink slip race from Fast and Furious, but in the podcasting gardening scene.
You're on, mate. Let's go.
Well, I wanted to get you on. I mean, I didn't even tell you this before. I asked you on Instagram, but I think you didn't see the message a while ago.
I didn't see the message. Yeah.
Instagram's
weird. It's got the primary and the general folders.
Yeah.
What's with the primary and... Yeah, I don't get Instagram. Yeah, I'm not on Instagram a whole lot, so when you messaged me on LinkedIn, that's when I saw it. So.
Well, I wasn't following on LinkedIn, and this is what we're going to get into, because I love LinkedIn. LinkedIn's my favorite social media platform because there isn't now I love Instagram too for the visual side of it, and some people do amazing work, so Instagram is second, but LinkedIn doesn't have a pretentious nature to it like a lot of the other social media sites do.
How long have you been following me for now?
2 weeks. No, longer than that.
Just keep following, you'll find the pretentious side.
Yeah, okay, all right. Maybe it's just the internet. But what I mean is that people post a little bit more vanity stuff on TikTok and Instagram, and then people I've seen post a lot more helpful stuff text-wise on LinkedIn, and I love your LinkedIn account. I think you do great on there. You also write, as an introduction for you, obviously your audience knows I'm releasing it on both platforms, but for those who don't know, you write articles for Ausbreed. You've written hundreds of articles for Ausbreed, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's like over 200 articles just for Ausbreed now.
And how many because you did your own blog, if I'm correct. So how many articles
about
in total?
100 for my blog. 100 articles for my blog. 50 of them were me just, never written before other than school and learning how to write. And then 50 more were punched through really quickly with the help of AI. And there's a steep learning curve there if you want to write with AI. Some of the stuff with Ausbreed has helped with AI, but when I say help with AI, it's just to make it faster. There's nothing that I wouldn't say myself on there. It all comes off of here, off of my dome.
Yep.
And also my own research.
I do the same thing now. So yeah. We're very similar in that I was writing articles for my website to help SEO, and then also as a way of learning. And then I'm writing these massive articles that took forever, and the AI comes along, and you're like, write an article for me, and you read it and like, structurally, this is great. Advice-wise, it's American or it's just completely wrong. And you go through and you treat yourself like an editor and you rewrite the article, keeping the structure, keeping some of the sentences that lead into other sentences, and then change all the the knowledge stuff about it, and you end up with something that's okay. But I did so many articles before AI, and then I'm now like, why did I do that? Why did I put myself through that torture? But anyway, so keep going. Tell us about your articles.
Yeah, well, I want to touch on what you just said then about it's bad. One of the ones that really gets me is opt for native plants because they're more adapted to the environment, this, that, and the other, which is obviously nonsense, particularly in Australia. Even endemic plants or indigenous plants may or may not be suitable for your backyard because obviously your backyard is different than what it used to be. And the idea that we can recreate natural resource settings in an urban environment is false. So, the fact we've got roads, we've got noise, the ecology's changed. So, yeah, I say that to say that AI is full of nonsense and you can't trust it. It's just, like you say, it's good for brainstorming ideas, for creating general structures, but you still got to do the work yourself. It's just sort of it's a bit of a shortcut to create similar sort of content than what you would be creating anyway.
Yeah, exactly. You have an idea of, I want to write an article on Monstera because there's one in front of me right now. And then you with the help of AI, you write the article you were going to write anyway. And instead of it taking you 6 hours, it takes you 1.5 hours or something like that.
Exactly right, yeah. Even
So
probably more than that, even still, because you've got to write the prompt. It's all in the prompt. That's the real
yeah,
art of it.
yeah. Well, I'm introducing you as a plant nerd in the best sense of the word,
Yeah. You could
and
call me a plant nerd, I think.
yeah, a plant nerd in the best sense of the word. A lot of knowledge. So I want to get into that. But what I actually want to do in the podcast, what I love about your LinkedIn is there's some posts on there that you've put out, and they're really good thought provoking posts, and you get a lot of comments, and they're some of the best. They're some of my favorite posts on Facebook groups or whatever. When someone's got a really good question and there's like a good discussion in the comments section. So I wanted to start with one where you talk about short, sharp answers, or what would you call it? Softened down answers, simple
Yeah,
answers
maybe
in
overly
horticulture.
simplified.
Simplified answers are not useful or are overrated. Tell me what you think on that, because I want to talk about, because the more I do stuff, the more I agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've picked up from the old heads that I look up to, and I think that's how it goes. When we begin our career, we look up to people, and then at a certain point, we're in the middle, and now suddenly, we can help other people up. And I'm probably in the middle of my career now, looking up to the really smart people who've gone before me, and now looking down to the people who are just starting their career, no matter what age you are. That doesn't matter. I'm talking about experience. And so I'm trying to give little nuggets to help them catch up to all the nuggets I picked from the people who are above me. So,
Yep.
it's stuff like, you can't ever plant the stem. That's a rule for beginners until you get to like potatoes and tomatoes, and then suddenly that rule doesn't apply. Or going back to
Yes.
the native thing again, natives are good and exotics are bad, which is just an overly simplistic thing. It's absolute nonsense. The fact that, or the idea that native plants are adapted or native plants are better for ecology. I mean, for goodness sake, have a look at a plant of lavender or something like that. Like the native wildlife absolutely loves exotic plants. And that's why we have weeds. Like that is literally one of the most important reasons behind weeds, like lantana in Queensland. It's just overtaking national parks, and the reason why is because the pollinators love it and the birds love the berries, and then they'll eat the berry and go and poo it somewhere. So, yeah.
Well, this morning I'm leaving the house, and we've got a bunch of poppies coming up, and we're between houses right now. We're going to be moving in somewhere in 2 weeks, but the tour, made us made it a bit difficult. But I'm staying at my wife's grandparents at the moment, and then we'll move into our new house in a couple of weeks. And the poppies that they've planted there, they've got all these poppies out there, and I walk out this morning, and there's, I don't know, a bee for every single flower, maybe more flying around. And it's exactly what you're saying. They're not, I think they're just standard honeybees, so not like a blue banded bee or a native bee. I'm getting a bee expert on soon because I know nothing about them, not compared to what somebody else knows. But it's 100% that idea of okay, let's get into this. I hate the word native. Not hate. I dislike the word native, because what does native mean? It's like Australia is so big that something that is native to Darwin may as well be European if you're going to plant it in a Perth climate and not irrigate it. Like if you leave it naturally in Perth, it will die as quickly as any European thing will, because that's not its environment. But you could put it as native. Vice versa, you take something from Perth up to Darwin, it probably would survive better because it probably liked the idea of having some sort of rainfall, but then humidity.
No, you got the humidity. The humidity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fungal diseases.
Yeah.
So when clients, I want native. It's like, okay, fine, all right. I know what you mean, but that annoys me.
Yeah. See, for me, I think native is very important culturally. So, like, I love native plants. Like, I think people think when I say that I'm disliking native plants, and that's probably because they're stuck in a black and white world of like this is good and that's bad. Whereas I think I'm less interested in like the moral, you need to do this or you need to do that, and more interested in like giving listeners a gift, like, hey, did you know that this is possible? You can try that, or this may be the answer that you're looking for, or even just to free your mind and be like, I know you thought you could only do natives, but actually I want to give you permission to do whatever you want to do because it's your garden. And for professionals, like both of our audiences, as long as a client's happy, you're getting paid, and you've done work that you can be proud of. It's horticulturally sound, and it's going to stand the test of time, up to the agreement that you and the client are on the same page. Who else's business is it? Put AstroTurf in. It's not my business.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hate AstroTurf as well.
Yeah. Well, so do I. But that's my personal opinion.
No, I agree. From a political standpoint, if we're going to get political, or what would you call it, philosophical, maybe even, it's your land. Do whatever you want. I am not going to lobby the government to say AstroTurf should be banned. I do not care that someone has AstroTurf. But if someone came to me and like, should I get AstroTurf? I'd be like, I don't know, should you stab your eyes out as well with a rusty spoon? Like that's the same level of advice I'd be going off for that. Should you eat your lawnmower? You can do it. You can eat your lawnmower, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like legally, I'm not going to put you in jail. But like that's the idea that I feel like people have strong opinions that are personal opinions, and then they try and put it on somebody else. Like you should also share this opinion. And then it gets very strange very quickly.
I completely agree. Yeah. And we see that particularly with chemicals, which is a whole other thing. Probably we shouldn't talk about that today, because I feel I'm on both sides of that argument, and then I feel like I'm in the middle trying to be like, well, did you guys hear what they said over here? But did you guys hear what they said over here? So I constantly find myself in the middle of the argument, being like, guys, you're both half right and half wrong.
You're the kid of some divorced parents who are still arguing about something. Exactly. Yeah, one foot in both camps. I'm going to see you on the weekend, you during the week. So. Exactly.
Can't we just be one big happy family?
So talking about, here's another thing that grinds my gears. I think we're just ranting now. Another thing that grinds my gears is the idea of water-wise plants, because a water-wise plant is not water-wise if you keep irrigating it the same amount you were watering your other ones. Does that make sense to you?
Is that what happens over there? Is that what they do? They do irrigated xeriscapes.
No, I can promise you that I've had people with aloes, or what else would you put in there? Some succulents, but it's most aloes or agaves or things like that, right? And then what they do is they have it on the same station as their kikuyu. And so they're watering their kikuyu, and the overspray is going to the garden bed, and they leave it like that. And I'm like, man, you could put almost anything in there. You're not actually saving water. And the other thing is the amount of water, because you're talking about a thin strip of garden bed, right? And 90% of is a kikuyu lawn or a couch lawn or something like that. And so it's like, oh, we're being water wise. And like, well, if you wanted to be water wise, halve the lawn maybe, and then leave it as cactus, and then delete that section of the irrigation period. But that happens, I would say, 1 out of every 20 or 30 gardens that want to go down that path. They just don't change the irrigation. So it happens a lot.
You guys have got sand there too.
That's all we've got.
Yeah.
I haven't seen clay ever in my life.
I don't. Yeah, you're not missing out on much. My house has heavy clay, and that's just as tricky. Although I grow kangaroo boars and I grow paper daisies semi-successfully. By the way, you guys have the best native Australian plants in WA. Everybody knows it.
Yeah, because they're bred in the crucible of the fire of hot, dry summers, and then they get exported across. Yeah, also
so many beautiful plants.
What's your favourites?
I love Chrysocephalum. I think that comes from everywhere, but also any paper daisy. Although I love to look at them, but I grow them at my place semi-successfully, because 1 out of 4 of them are doing well. One of them died. One of them's looking okay, and one of them's looking really poorly, and I just can't keep it up. And the difference is minute amounts of sunlight. Like one of them might get an hour more than the others, and it's just doing so much better. Or one of them might be a bit higher up, I think, as well, and that stops it because the water kind of goes down. And because it's heavy clay, it's like your hydrophobic sand in that it hits the top, rolls off, and then just goes into whatever the nearest dip is. So the one that's doing really well is in a bit of a dip, and it gets all the sun. So they're just so fussy. Like all the other gardens, like whether it's Scaevola or the callistemons and stuff, like they tend to not be that different.
You're looking at getting a new battery tool lineup for your business this spring? have a look at the new Toro 60 volt Revolution Professional series. I recently had the opportunity to head down to the Brisbane headquarters of Toro, and I got my hands on some of these tools, and I can honestly say that there's some really well built tools. The Revolution series runs off the 60 volt Flex Force system, and it powers a whole range of tools, including line trimmer, hedge trimmer, blower, and the 21-inch heavy-duty 60-volt mower. The line trimmer and the hedge trimmer can be run through the onboard batteries, just like you would expect, but also through the backpack linkage, which means that if you have large commercial jobs, it lightens the load and makes it a much easier job for you. There are a lot of interesting innovations in this lineup, including a 6-port multi-charger that you can put on the wall, which is really useful if you're running and relying on a battery system. And like I said, there's a whole lineup of tools ready to go for your business on this platform. So if you want to find out more information, head to the Toro website. There's a link in the description, or to your local Toro dealer. Thank you, Toro, for sponsoring this part of the podcast. So what do you find? What have you found going from, because you used to live in Melbourne, for those who don't know, and then you've moved up to Brisbane, which is a massive sort of environmental change, weather and temperature and rainfall. And so what have you learned? Because how long have you been in Brisbane, and what are the things that you're learning about the climate since you've moved there?
So I'm a horticultural, like a landscape maintenance guy by trade. Like that's my experience. I think I started in 2011, so about 10 years on the tools. I started in Queensland before I knew anything. I was just hedging and mowing, and just had no respect for horticulture at all. I just thought I was the same as the clients. I just thought it was easy, and then moving to Melbourne and just. I guess the big difference is, okay, there's so many differences. So one is we get the rain in summer in Queensland, so that's a big difference. So we get belted by rain, and the problem is, because we try and ship it out to the sea as quickly as possible with massive big drains like that are that high, just guzzling up all that rainwater from the streets. We're trying to get rid of the water as quickly as possible, whereas I think what I'd like to see is maybe more rain guns where we can capture all that water and put it down into the soil water table rather than treating it as a waste product. So in Queensland, that really bothers me. But in Melbourne, you get more like winter rains and stuff like that. So I don't know, everything's so different. Like there's not as many deciduous trees up here, for example, much more subtropical style. Still get a lot of philodendron xanadu up here, unfortunately. I'm guessing that you get them there as well. They're absolutely everywhere.
Do you hate them, do you?
Yeah.
Is that because you don't like the plant or because it's overused?
No, it's overused. It's a fine plant, but it's just... Okay. I think I'm a bit of a snob sometimes. Like, I know that that's not a nice thing to admit, but I guess just seeing it everywhere, I'm like, come on, pick something else. But someone like my mum, who's a property developer, loves it because you can just put it in. It looks green all the time. And then, you can't really kill it with malpruning or anything. You might leave some bare patches that'll fill in. But I saw it on one of the Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show jobs. And I remember sort of thinking, like, there's no place for that plant here.
So I've never hated it. I don't really like it, but I think the problem for us here is it needs a south or east facing spot, because if it gets the northern sun or the afternoon sun, it gets baked, and then the tips go, and even if you're watering it all the time, the tips go, and then they don't recover. So you just have ugly looking tips. But my go-to plant is liriope. I think liriope is one of the most underrated plants because it just loves it. It can do almost anything. It can do a pretty shady spot to full sun. It likes getting abused. You don't really need to prune it. The flowers, I mean, they don't really come. You get flowers, but they're not tall enough that you see them. But the benefit is you don't have to deadhead them, and you just put it in, and it's just there. And I'm kind of like every rental in Perth, at least. I mean, it might be different. They might not do the humidity. I don't know. But every rental in Perth, I'm just like, I don't know, put 50 in them. You don't really need to divide them. They don't really get unruly. Just put them everywhere, and the dog can run over the top of them, and it'll survive. And the kids can kick a soccer ball, and it'll survive. And then maybe what you do is you put one tree that's kind of your focal tree, make it look nice. And that's your standard, simple garden lawn, liriope, one tree in a small backyard. You're not winning any design points for it, But
Yeah,
for a rental where someone's going to abuse it and forget to turn the irrigation on, like you're fine. It'll survive. It'll do okay. You know.
Oh, yeah, completely agree. So I think a lot of them are pretty good in the wet as well and the dry. So a buffer plant like that is amazing. Like, how many times do we have that one position that's like next to a fence or something where in winter it gets no light and then in summer it gets like 4 to 6 hours of like really heavy
Yeah.
light? So what do you put in a position like that? Yeah, it's like Liriopes are ideal. And
Yeah.
you
What
can
do
mow them
you?
too. If there's low growing varieties are a great turf alternative. Mow them once a year.
Yeah, low grow
That's
varieties.
stealing work from you, but sorry.
No, so no. So low grow varieties. I don't know about this because I've been just putting in
Yeah.
evergreen giant or whatever it's called.
Oh yeah,
Just
there's lower ones. Yeah, Osbreed has
mate.
one. Isabella. Yeah.
Okay, I'm googling this.
Shout out. Yeah,
Uh,
Isabella Lyria.
well,
Isabella's
tell
a good
us
one for low growth.
while I'm looking this
Yeah.
up. I'll put it
Mm.
on the screen. But while I'm looking it up, tell me about Osbreed a little bit because I know what they're like. But
Mm.
they're like a plant. They're a plant breeder, right? So they.
Mm.
Well, you tell me.
Okay, this is. I guess I'll start by saying what a plant breeder is at first. So let's say that Isabella Lyria, right?
Yeah.
Somebody had to kill a lot of plants to bring that up. So so how it works with breeding is right. So you've got male genetics and female genetics. So you've got the pollen and you've got the ovary. So just like with humans, you get the
Yep.
male part into the female part, and then you get a little seed. That little
Yep.
seed is an individual that has never been seen before. It has very unique genetics. Just like me
Yes.
and my brother are not the same. Me and my younger brother, or either of my younger brothers, we're not the same. We have different
Yep.
tolerances. We have different preferences, etc. We look different. We both got the hair. We both got the cow's lick because we're both fullers, but we're still different. So I guess plants are like that too. Now, someone like Osbreed will put 10,000 or maybe even 2,000, something like Lamandra longifolias into a bog, and he'll get seeds from all around the country, put them all together into a wet bog. Now,
Yep.
99.9% of them are just going to die because they cannot tolerate that. And then he'll get like 2 of them that are good, and then he'll be like, all right, well, which one do I like? They're both okay, but maybe I can make them look a bit prettier. So then he'll put them together, and then, out of that progeny, he'll test them again, make sure they can still do that tolerance, and then he'll
Yep.
bring it to market. So I guess that's a bit different to someone like you've got the tulip breeders in Holland, where they're really breeding for just like colour or form
Yep.
or minute differences. And then you'll do a lot of inbreeding back to the parent and back down to the kid. And, you're really trying to get the
Yeah.
aesthetics. But you
No,
lose
they do that.
the...
They only do that in
you lose the
Tasmania.
strength.
That side of the plant breeding.
Is that right?
Yeah, the
Oh, right,
inbreeding
the
stuff.
inbreeding.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
that's only in
And New
Tasmania. The
Zealand.
rest of
Yeah.
the rest of the common sense breeding is done up in Queensland with you guys.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
Tasmanians.
Now, he's in New South Wales. I work remotely for the company, just for the...
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're taking. So I've cut you off there at a serious point and made a silly joke about Tasmanians. But what you're saying is they basically are trying to find the strengths that they're looking for, which would be in this example bog tolerance, and they then pick the ones that do the best, and they keep breeding them until you get a variety. You talk about seeding. That means that if you take a Liriope, it is probably grown from what division on a Liriope standpoint, so that you have the same variety, or
It doesn't
how do
matter.
they?
So that's this. So okay. So you've got that seed grown, right? So that's a
Yep.
unique individual. Once you have that individual, you can propagate it by cutting. Just divide it at the root zone, divide different plants because now they're twins. They're identical clones.
Yes.
So once that seed is sprouted and that plant exists, hey ho! Now we've got a winner. Now we can just propagate. Usually it's done with tissue culture, which is just like dividing by cutting, but just with scalpels and microscopes and in perfectly
controlled,
sterile environment.
Yeah,
controlled. So I've got an episode coming up. I've interviewed plant propagation specialist Lisa. So that one's coming out in a few days. So that one's going to be good. But yeah, so once you have that individual, and you just start propagating it, and then it's the same individual. You just got to market it and make sure the landscape architects know about it, and the retailers or whoever your market is know about it, and then you've just got to sell it. So you can keep propagating that plant on and on again. Eventually, you want to come back to the original mother plant and start again because sometimes genetics can shift very slowly.
Yes,
if that makes sense. So it can start to change. You might get a variegated one or something. And then, all right, back to the drawing board again. Let's start again.
Well, you keep the
But
variegated one and be like, sweet, that's a new one.
you reckon?
You know, that's Isabella
You like
variegated, and we
variegated
go
stuff?
back. So now you got two. Well,
Yeah. Well, exactly right.
on
Essentially,
occasion,
yes. Yeah,
I don't have many
essentially, yeah. And that's
variegated
what
plants.
happens. So with some of those ones like the Grey Box and Mundi Westringia, which are two flagship Osprey plants, they did come out variegated, and now they have been sold on, and they're going to be new plants. So some people love variegation. Again, sorry, I'm a plant snob. But like variegation for indoors, this is just my personal taste. I like variegation indoors, but when it comes to the landscape, I think that trend has kind of sailed. I feel just my personal feeling.
I agree. Well, I've got a variegated ficus because I got heaps of plants in here.
They're
I can't
nice.
move.
Yeah.
I can't move this around because I've got a trailer directly behind me. But I've got a variegated epipremnum or two, and that's it. The rest of the plants in here, like I do like that green color, but then you get like Monstera Thai Constellation, and people pay. You know, they'll sell their firstborn child for a large variety of that. You know, or they'll the tissue culture of that they buy on the internet and ship over is still $100 or something stupid. And it definitely. Oh, what's the other one? Oh, there's a philodendron that's I can't remember. I remember seeing it, and it was like it was like $700 for a 13 centimeter pot or something like that. And people they really froth over that on the indoor plant thing, and it's like a badge of honor. And they collect 75,000 of them. And I can understand it. I've probably got 70 plants in here, but yeah, it's kind of what would you call it, a genetic mutation that is actually not helpful for the plant. Would you put it that way?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's reducing the amount of chlorophyll, isn't it? So.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, I don't want to say any insensitive words here, but it's kind of like the black sheep of the family, and they go for a better price.
Like the runt. Yeah.
Exactly.
Like
that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I was going to say another word that was going to get me cancelled. I'm glad you came up with a better one, but it's the runt of the family. Use your imagination, audience. But there's the runt of the family is selling for $700, and the rest of us who actually went to university and did something good with our lives are being sold on eBay for $50 a piece. So variegated
faster. Yeah,
exactly. We can take more light in. I've got Isabella Lirio on the screen. So tell me about this. So, 40 centimeters to 50 centimeters. So it's not as small as I thought you were saying. I thought it was going to be like a Mondo grass or something. Lirio Mondo.
It is. It's pretty small. 50. I'd say 50 centimeters. And that's if you let it go. Like if you mow it once a year, it's not going to get that big.
Well, it says here, better performer than Mondo in full sun and works Australia wide.
Yeah.
Do you know one of my...
And that one's heavy shade too.
Yes, exactly. That's it.
And wet feet. Phytophthora resistant. I don't know how much Phytophthora you guys get there with all that sand, but certainly in clayish soils, it's
I'll be honest, I don't even know what you're talking about. Phytophthora. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, cool.
But in sand, I guess it's not much of a problem, hey? Yeah, unless it's...
Well, there's some swamps. There's some swamps around. There's a private school we do a very occasional work at, and they're next to a swamp. And they have some troubles with that, with the trees in certain car parks because someone didn't plan their, water management properly. But no, other than select areas. So yeah, you reckon you can just mow this with a lawnmower?
Oh yeah, yep. There's another turf variety he has too, which is brand new. I'm not getting paid for any of this, by the way. I just, I work for Osbreed and I do like the plants, but this is not a sponsored episode. But Osbreed Zengrass Zoysia. So go up the top, find plants, just scroll down to exotics.
Hold on a second. I've just found that there's a video of someone actually mowing it.
Yeah, that's Todd. That's a head breeder,
Todd. Todd got lazy. I can't be stuffed. Out comes a Honda 196, I think it is. And the Stihl FS94. All right, so where was I going?
I was going to tell you about Zengrass Zoysia. So go up the top of that website again. Find plants, hardy exotics. Actually, we've just found out this is actually a native hybrid from the herbarium. I'm going to go hardy exotic.
Yep.
And then scroll down to where it goes Zengrass Zoysia. It's a Zoysia grass. If you keep going down. So in Queensland, because it's a... Oh, God.
If I just click... Oh,
just Google search Zengrass Zoysia. It'll come up. He might have moved it into the native plants. recently. But
I'm
if you
gonna
just
I'm
Google
gonna search it.
Zengrass zoysia.
Bear with us, listeners. Okay, got it. Yeah. So tell me about this.
Okay, so Zengrass zoysia, we've just found out it's a native hybrid. This is it's a true turf grass. It is a zoysia grass, but mow it once a year in Queensland. So in Queensland, usually you're mowing every 2 weeks in like spring and autumn, and then sometimes if you've had a lot of rain through spring and summer, it can be every 1 week you need to mow.
Yeah, of course.
Well,
Yeah,
this one
easy.
needs mowing once a year for this one, so it's really slow growing. It comes in plugs instead of rolls, so you install tubes into the landscape. Depending on how quickly you want them to meet up, you can plant them further apart. If you've got mulch underneath that turf, it'll really create like more pronounced mounding. So hopefully listeners can see it on the screen. But if you're listening, you can just Google it or imagine it at least. It's just like kind of will be very much at home in a Japanese garden with all that mounding. So you can
the
kind of see
Nomo
this photo
zoysia style. You can see that there. I'll zoom in on it.
Mm.
So it's kind of not really supposed to be an actively used turf space, I'm guessing, but more like a ground cover. Looks neat, low maintenance. Water requirements pretty low, I'm guessing.
Can do both. So it can do flooding or drought. Yes, so I'd say you can walk over it, but it's not to play footy on.
Yeah.
So it can take foot traffic, but yeah.
That's the downside of like a slow growing grass is that it's then also slow to repair if it does get damaged.
Correct.
And so people
you wouldn't drive over it regularly or something like that. Yeah.
They want their once a year mow that can also handle a dog. And you're like, mate, they're actually completely opposite requests you're asking there.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah,
whereas you've got the rhizomes with a turf grass like that, whereas the liriope's much more clumping. So different growth habit, different style.
Yeah.
Different type.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites, I don't know if you guys do this, is I don't even know what it's called, but the really dark mondo grass, like the almost leaf. Black leaf one. Yeah, I think they're cool. I don't know where you could use them in a way that it doesn't look super formal. And I'm not into super formal. I love straight hedges and I love the art of doing that, but the super, super formal, you know how people put these little rows of mondo grass in between their paving and stuff like that. But I love those. I love Karuba Black, which is how come this word is escaping my mind? What's the cordyline? You remember that?
Yeah.
Cordyline Karuba Black, which is like that really dark cordyline. It goes light if you leave it in full sun, but I love that really dark plant look.
Yeah, it's nice. Especially you can do so much with it, can't you? Because that colour theory, I've been learning about colour theory with my job with Osbred because I've got to create resources for landscape architects. So there's a lot behind that too. Like, I'm the sort of person where I'll just put all the colour into one bed, but then it's like, yeah, but if you go hot colours like orange, red and yellow, then you're inspiring the passions. Whereas if you go with the cool colours like your purples and your certain pinks can be hot or cold. And then you've also got like your blues and those tones can be calming and relaxing. So, you might choose different colours for like an outdoor entertaining area versus a reading nook. Or, maybe you want to draw the eye to a certain feature in the landscape. So then you use the bold colours there. And there's just so much to the colour, which I'd never learnt about before until recently.
Well, here's one of your posts I wanted to bring up. You said, if landscape architects are the dreamers of the industry, the nursery folk, landscapers and maintenance pros are the boots on the ground. I kind of feel that landscape architects get all the praise because they do an amazing job. But if it wasn't for great people on the ground, that garden that they design is dead in 6 months, a year, depending on, how badly someone treats it. So what do you feel about that?
I completely agree. Yeah. So, and also on the other court, before I actually go on, landscape architects can sometimes be the reason why plants fail too. Because if they've specified the wrong plant for the wrong place, they're supposed to know about that. But unfortunately, there's so much training they have to do. And I think that a lot of landscape architects really feel that they need to know more about plants and that they feel really bad that they don't. But they have to learn about slope gradients, hardscape materials, they have to learn about drainage. They have to learn about so much stuff. And then they may only get 2 horticulture courses. And all that is learning 200 plant names. Okay, great. So you can name the plants, but you can't tell me what their characteristics are, or this, that, and the other, and their tolerances. So they spend a lot of time researching plants. And it's up to the rest of us to help their dreams become a reality, because they're the dreamers, and they are afforded they get to have their head in the clouds and dream and create spaces that are maybe they address social issues or inclusivity and all these sorts of things. Like, these are really important to these guys and girls. So yeah, I think that's right. I think that, and that's just a fun little thing I just put out there. Like, landscape architects have they're the head in the cloud, and the rest of us are the boots on the ground. And we all we form a whole body together, and we all need to know our place. Like, me as a maintenance gardener, it's like bang, 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 rush, 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 rush. Like, landscape architects may feel that they're like that, but they've got no idea what it's like to be under the pump, like we are in maintenance. So yeah, and as a maintenance gardener, it's my responsibility to make sure those plants look like how the dreamers had envisioned them to look at the start. I can't just come in and dome prune all the lomandras and hedge prune everything into man-made shapes if their intent was for a natural, wild-looking garden. It's doing them a disservice.
So, what would you think is more important? A really good designer who comes up with a really good design, and then having an average maintenance crew, or an average designer who then comes up with, or the design is average, but then the maintenance crew who is amazing, does an amazing job of maintaining it?
Okay, depends. Are we saying the maintenance gardening can just, if they're really amazing, can we just redesign the whole garden, or is that off the table? Because that's
no, they got to deal with what they can, But you got. I'm not talking
here and there. Yeah,
exactly. Maybe chucking in some annuals if they really want to, but nothing major.
So I guess the purpose of this is to have a garden that looks good, in the future, right? So which one is more important? If we're gonna walk 100 meters, which one's more important, a head or 2 feet? Because to me, it seems like you need both.
Mate, I just watched the Paralympics, so now I don't even know, because some of those guys at the Paralympics are pretty amazing.
I'm talking about walking.
I know what you mean.
You get what I mean? It's both. It's both. It's always going to be both.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some of the people I see walking around act like they haven't got a head, if you know what I mean. There's some pretty... Some of the people I saw driving the other day act like they don't have a head.
Gardeners. That's the maintenance gardeners. Yeah, we don't have a head. That's what I'm trying to say. I am one, so I can say that.
Well, so am I, and I agree. Some of the mistakes I've made. I tend to err on the side of the maintenance gardener, and the reason is that most of my job, and if you talk about the highest and the best end gardens out there, like, they are really only going to be built by the 1% who can truly afford that kind of investment and who care. And those gardens can almost be maintained by anybody who's got a couple of years experience. They're that good. But in the real world, what happens is somebody who's a normal landscaper will come in, they'll do an okay landscaping job, and they're working to a budget. I'm not insulting any landscapers here. They're doing what the client wants, and the client gets something average, and an average maintenance guy with an average landscape, and it's gone after a while. But a great maintenance person, man, female, whoever, really cares, they can make that average design thrive. Even if the soil prep wasn't quite right, they're going to put some product down to compensate as much as they can, and they're going to do what they can. They're going to solve problems that probably should have been solved by a landscaping person if the ball was dropped or the budget didn't allow for it. So I'm kind of like 51-49. So I'm off the fence as little as you possibly could be. But, I don't want to say that to be disparaging. I just feel that if you're talking about people in the real world who have budgets, they probably can't really do what the landscape designer really, really, really wanted. And those sort of compromises can be kind of sorted out by someone who knows what they're doing in the maintenance sector.
So you're saying, like, if the ship's maybe heading in the wrong direction because the captain put it in the wrong direction at the start, at least the maintenance crew can start turning that ship in the right direction, kind of thing.
Yeah, or maybe like if the wheels are kind of falling off because the car design is a little bit bad, at least the maintenance guy can get the rattle gun out and put them on, tighten them up every now and then. But, it's kind of, Yeah, it is kind of both. It is kind of both. But
Mm.
I've just seen a lot of good designs. We usually rock up to them after they've been neglected, especially in WA. Someone's got this great design, and then some idiot changes out the Okay, I'll tell you this story. All right, we work at a private school, and the private school, they have some money. It's a private school. It's not a massive school. It's not an endless budget. They've got some money. They had a full-time gardener, and they eventually sacked that full-time gardener and replaced it with a maintenance employee who does the building stuff and us as a contractor.
Yeah.
What happened is, and I'm going to get a sprinkler manufacturer on the podcast soon, because I want to talk all things sprinklers, because I know a little bit, but I want to really get to the bottom of this. What they did is they took some I-25s, which are $120-ish sprinklers for this oval, and they replaced it with $30 sprinklers that were the same size. Same brand still, both Hunter sprinklers, but they cheaped out all these sprinklers. Every time a sprinkler broke, they replaced it with a cheap one. So then you have more and more and more and more faults. Right. And then what they did is the controller broke, and there was, from memory, I should know this off the top of my head, I think it's 8 stations on this oval, and they replaced it with a 6-station controller, right, which would be $150 less expensive, right, for a school with hundreds. It's a private school, like they can afford it. They replaced it with a 6-station controller and 2 adder stations, which are like little wide things you can put in, blah, blah. So that's how they get their 8. They then have non-stop problems with irrigation for 2 or 3 years. And if you look at the Google Maps of the oval is green in sections and dead in other sections, and it is in a pattern, and it's the irrigation that's not working, right? Sprinklers are not throwing out water in an even rate. So even though it's working, some's getting more than others and all that sort of stuff. And it was a mess. They sacked the guy, and they didn't know what the problem was. They just knew that it wasn't looking good, so they got us in. And it took us so long to work out what the problem was because of, do you know what I mean? Like the neglect. Now, this is not an average maintenance person. This is probably someone who's worse. But what I'm getting at is you have that person, the person who did the landscaping on that oval could have done the perfect job with all the money and resources in the world. And then some maintenance guys come in and for years made him look like an idiot. So that's kind of where I'm going down that path. Whereas you have someone who's a genius on the maintenance side, they can kind of make a garden look neat, tidy, the mulch that they put in, the way they water it, the plants might look stupid. Somebody might have filled it with yuccas, and someone who's a genius still can potentially, with divine intervention, maybe make it look okay, you know?
Well, I think you can maintain a 7 out of 10 out of 7 out of 10. Whereas, a 10 out of 10 landscape design can quickly become a 0 out of 10 if no one does it, or if someone comes in with a hedge trimmer and a spray backpack, and they don't understand about pruning theory and stuff like that. Like, for me,
that's a great way to put it. I agree with that.
Pruning theory is one of the big ones, by the way. Do you know how to prune? Has anyone ever taught you how to prune? I don't mean this to be like... For me, I only learned to prune a couple of years ago. And when I learned it, I was like, holy, I've been doing this wrong my entire life. My boss taught me how to prune.
Yeah, you go.
Like, I've been doing it wrong forever.
Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to go get a book.
Go for it. While you're gone, I don't know if you'll cut this out or not, but anybody can go on YouTube and just just search for plant amnesty. Shout out to Cass Turnbull. She's passed away, but she was a huge influence on me, and she taught me how to prune. And all my bosses were all wrong. Sorry, I just went on a bit of a rant while you were away.
Oh, yeah, Cass here we go.
Plant amnesty. All right, what do we got here?
I'm going to take this thing off the screen. Why have I still got Osbreed on the screen? This is the Royal Horticultural Society Pruning and Training revised new edition, over 800 plants. Okay, right. Have you seen this book before?
I've seen it. I haven't read through it. For me,
it's English.
I like to break.
It's European,
English, being the RHS. I like to break plants down. I wouldn't do it every plant. I'd break them down into plant forms, and the 80-20 rule. I'd get 80% of my results with 20% of the knowledge. But what are they saying? What's their theory?
What they say is blunt hedge trimmer on everything, and it solves all your
never
problems.
Wash your blades.
No, what's that for? That's just for vanity metrics. What I'm saying is, I go to this book. I would say that my pruning knowledge is passable, but I feel like you're about to drop some truth bombs, and then I might actually be helped from.
I want to
So
break it down and just give like 3 or 4 sentences and tell you 70% of what you need to know about pruning.
go for
So
it.
let's just go into it. So there are 3 types of cuts fundamentally. First of all, actually, let's start. You've got roots, stems, leaves, and reproductive parts. That's all plants are, no matter what their shape is. A grass stem is essentially the same as a eucalypt stem. They're monocots and dicots. There are differences there. But at the end of the day, that's how I want you to think of it. I want you to think of it as roots, stems, leaves, and reproductive parts. So let's just think about any shrub now. Let's just go into shrubs. You know, on each
Lily pilly.
a lily pilly, any shrub, native, exotic, doesn't matter. They're all the same. So particularly when we go into dicots, but you have the mother branch, and then you have branches that come off sideways. When you prune a branch at the tip, it does not grow from that tip. It can only grow from what are called lateral shoots coming from the side, which are generally from within a leaf axil. So you kind of like got the stem, you got a little leaf there. Hidden beneath that leaf is a little bud. And if you look at most plants, you can see it. Some of them are hidden. But when a new branch arises from that mother branch, a side branch from the mother branch, that is coming from one of those side shoots. So if I just tip prune, that creates a lot of side shoots that come out, and that's how you get a bushy hedge, right? But if I prune back to a branch, down to a fork, a tree is like a river. So when I cut to a branch, to a fork, that the energy comes up, the same amount of energy that was going to go to both of those branches, suddenly now all of that energy gets diverted along that one fork that I pruned down to. Because it's like I've dammed off the river at a fork, right? So if I dam off a river at a fork, all the water diverts into that one part. Whereas if I dam a river non-selectively, like tip pruning or just cutting to anywhere along, it's essentially like putting a dam in the middle of the river so it'll bust out the sides. All of that water will come, hit that dam, and bust out the sides. And that's essentially what's happening with hedge pruning, is that we're continuously doing that sort of cut until it's just so many lateral branches that you can't see through it. Now it's a screen. So there's also need to learn about flush cuts and where the branch collar is. There is more theory to it. But if you just think about a tree as like a river, or never touch trees actually, leave that for the arborists. But a shrub is like a river. And that's the nugget that I try and leave you with.
Recently, I made a small business course called the Aussie Green Biz Mastery Course. It's for people who are starting out in the industry or who have been in maybe for a year or two, and they're really good at the gardening side, but they struggle on the business side. There's 47 lessons that cover everything from how to get great clients to how to work out your pricing, how to work out a system that's efficient, and ultimately set up a business that is going to be successful. Essentially, what I did is I thought about myself as a 19-year-old. I thought, looking back when I started my business, what would I tell my 19-year-old self to help him avoid all the stupid mistakes that I ended up making and have success in a much quicker time frame? If you know somebody who wants to start a business, it's made for them. If you're struggling in your business, you love the industry, and you want a successful business, this is made for you. We recently added the option as well to break down the payment over 4 months, so it makes it a little bit more affordable for those who are just starting out. The course is called the Aussie Green Biz Mastery Course. For more information, follow the link. So the idea you're getting at is if you want to create a certain type of shape, you can do that by guiding it through a certain type of pruning. So if you want thick, bushy hedge, the tip pruning works. But if you wanted to train it in a different way, you could do that through pruning on the divide. To a fork. That's the word you're using.
So that's for the natural shape. I love the natural shape of plants. I like to see those fractal patterns in the branch.
Yes.
The first time you hedge prune a tree, it'll never be the same ever again. Ever, 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 ever. So that's why I like... Personally, this is my preference. I'll leave a callistemon or a lily pilly or something go for 5-10 years and then coppice it at the base and let it start again. So I'll always have that natural shape. Coppicing them at the base, which just means like pruning them 30 centimeters or below, just gives them a fresh new flush. Not all plants can tolerate it. A lot of them can. You keep the roots how they are, like lots of energy in the roots, and then you just give them a refreshing with that foliage. All the legginess goes away, and you can really improve lifespans for plants, particularly like callistemons, grevilleas, acacias. Like these can be shorter lived plants, but when you coppice them, they live 2, 3, 4 times longer.
So, talking about that, what are your thoughts on the? I know coppicing is not the right word, but when you're doing that harsh cut, say you've got, let's just use callistemon, right? And instead of cutting it back to the bottom, or bottle brush for those who are new, you say you're cutting it back to the bottom 30 centimeters, right? Let's say we've got a 3 meter tall tree at this stage, and you cut it to maybe head height, and you're cutting 3 or 4 branches left, not just one trunk, and you're cutting it right back to that. Are you a fan of that? Because that happens sometimes in the industry. I guess it would depend on the tree, maybe certain types, but I see that a lot in a budget sense. People are just like, it's too big, just cut it back. What are your thoughts on that?
So some people call that pollarding, but if you talk to
that's
a
the word I was
qualified
looking
arborist,
for.
yeah, but if you talk to a qualified arborist, they'll say pollarding something different. No, it's sorry. No, so pollarding is actually slightly different. There's a bit more to, like, I guess what an arborist will call pollarding, but we can just call that pollarding for now. Like, I'm not going to get stuck on that. I don't know what else to call that other than a hard cut. But I think that's fine. For callistemons, it's fine. I would say if this is, if you haven't been trained how to cut a 3 meter tall tree down, maybe just avoid it, because if you're cutting anything bigger than what can be done with a secateurs, you're really causing some damage to a tree, and I would probably get in an arborist and avoid doing that. But for me, I think so-called pollarding of particularly something like a callistemon or a grevillea is fine. It should resprout. Most of the time they do. I'd just make sure it's really happy before you do that. So make sure it's had a really good drink. Give it some seaweed liquid feed. Get some microbes in there. All those microbes in the soil and around the root zone are going to help it through that stressful patch. They're going to provide defense from stresses such as particularly pests and diseases, but they can also believe it or not, microbes can transport water from one tree to another, and nutrients from one tree to another. There's this whole stock market going on beneath the soil. It's incredible. Plants are always trading nutrients and water with each other, and fungus is always facilitating that. Like mycorrhizae, you might have heard of that. Not to get off on a tangent there, but I mean, just make sure the plant's really happy before you stress it out. So that would be my thing. Callistemons, go for it. But if you're pruning anything bigger than what can be done with a secateurs, you're doing damage. And
so is this in a tree or in a shrub?
Both. I mean, what is a tree and a shrub? Like that, there's sort of like similar things, and it really does depend on the species too. Like some eucalypts, you can come to the base, like Eucalyptus caesia, like you guys have there, one of the most beautiful native Western Australian plants. You can coppice them. They've got an underground, what do you call it, tuber? There's a word for eucalypts. But if with a red gum, you can't do that. You can't just coppice it. It will not like that at all. So it depends on the species. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, coppicing was actually really like a tree, what would you call it, a forestry thing, where you would, back in the day, if I'm remembering from, something I was learned, 15 years ago, but I believe that they used to, harvest the wood, but chop it in such a way that it would regrow, because you might have a 25-year-old root system that is now shooting up new growth, and the growth that comes from it was fairly straight and usable. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but anyway, so I got taught
I don't know too much about forestry, but it makes sense. So what I guess you'd probably do is you'd coppice it, let all those water sprouts grow again from that base, like those epicormic shoots, as I was describing. They were underneath the leaf. Now that leaf's fallen off at one point. You've got tree rings. The trunk's going bigger. Anyway, those little buds are still underneath there somewhere, so they'll pop out after you've coppiced it, and then you might pick one or two, probably one leader, that the strongest, straightest one, your favorite of those sprouts.
Yep.
And then you'll let that grow. So, and it's a time to it. There's an art to it. There's a science to it, and we're dealing with living things. So I'm sure a doctor would tell you, I'm pretty, this particular procedure is pretty safe, but every now and then someone dies. Well, trees are like that too, or plants are like that too.
So I learned something about epicormic growth. I think it's the biggest word that I know in the industry. So every time I say it, I feel a little bit smarter. But I was doing a course I used to work at some schools, and they had a pruning course for specifically safety. And the reason is that with all of our Widowmaker eucalypts that we have here, people were treating them in certain ways that were not great, and they had a a massive branch fall on a playground in WA. This is probably 12 years ago or something now, but it fell on a playground. It's always on CCTV footage at 8 something in the morning in school holidays. So no kids were hurt. Playground was ruined. Yeah. No, I should have said that at the beginning.
Wow.
So it didn't stress anyone out.
Oh, I thought this was going in a different direction.
No. But it scared the bejeebers out of them, as it should have. And they were like, because what happened is the reason why the tree lost its branch was because it was car park, tree, playground. And they put the car park in, they extended the car park, damaged the roots of the tree. And it was like weeks later or a month later or something like that, the branch fell down. And the education department were like, yes, that was a big mistake. We shouldn't have done that. And, I don't know if it was the big school holidays or whatever. So, but yeah, so then I don't know if they took that tree out or they decided, no, like we're not risking it anymore. But one of the things that they mentioned in this course was, if you are pruning a big tree, and we weren't allowed to anyway, we were just gardeners, right? We didn't have it, but they were like, if you're pruning a big tree and you do, like we're talking a really tall tree with really big branches, the epicormic growth is not strong. It doesn't have the load-bearing capacity that a heartwood growth or the original growth that comes from the tree would. And so they're the branches that are most likely to fall off in a storm. And this is one of the reasons why we don't want you to prune stuff, is because if you just go out there and look, you're talking something that's about your size, maybe even 3 meters tall, and the branch is never going to get any bigger than your arm or any thicker than your arm. If that falls down, it'll hurt someone, probably won't kill anybody. It's falling from 1.5 meters and you're, 1.7. So, that's as bad as it's going to be. But these big trees, it is a completely different category, and you can put houses and people at risk if you didn't know that. So anyways, that was you don't forget that kind of lesson, I guess.
No, and there's litigation too. So if you are the cause of a tree hurting someone or damaging property, you're opening yourself to litigation. If you have a property and you haven't engaged an arborist to look at it, particularly public parks, I'm not sure how much that is in residential, but I'm terrified of litigation. Like, I'm so scared of it. I'm really scared of hurting someone too. And we had someone on the podcast a while ago who was a parks manager, and he was talking about it was a leadership episode, but he was talking about how he had to lead his team through a death. A branch fell on a lady in the pram and killed someone. Died. It might have been the baby. So there's the death, and then there's also the media crying for everyone to be fired and trying to crucify everyone involved. Then there's the arborist who did the safety check and ticked it all off and said this tree's fine. But the thing was, they went through his notes and they found, actually, no, he did nothing wrong. He'd done everything. The tree was at an acceptable risk, but there's always going to be some risk there. And then, one freak weather event, whether it's a drought or a flood, or, as you say, pruning the roots, things can happen. And you're right, those epicormic growth shoots, the water sprout, which are a response to damage or stress, they're like almost kind of sticky taped on in a way. Like, they're not like the proper slow growth that comes out. When the tree has to rush it, it doesn't mind if it breaks again. It's just like, hey, I need some more solar panels out to make more energy, because if I spend all that energy in my roots, then I'm going to die. I need to start making an investment again. I need to start investing in myself. So Gary Moran, who's a consulting arborist, who's a regular on my show, brought up the term, and I never forgot this. He said the tree's pension. It has a store of carbon, which is like sugars and carbohydrates and proteins and stuff, and that carbon is stored within the stems and within the roots. And when we cut off stems and roots, we're removing that tree's pension. It has to make it back again. And then if it can't, then it starts sacrificing limbs. It goes, all right, well, I can't afford to keep this limb anymore, so I'm just going to seal it off, and then it'll just fall.
Yeah. That's really common with some eucalyptus, right? Is it more common with certain natives, or is there other trees that we got to be wary of?
I would go through like plant families, genus, species, when I'm talking about like plant characteristics more. I find natives versus exotics are very unhelpful. So it's like, yeah, eucalypts definitely are prone for that, but then it's like some eucalypts aren't. There's what are the low growing ones that have the tuber under the ground? Mallees.
Yeah.
So like a eucalyptus caesia, fine. Do whatever you want to that. That'll be fine. Like you say, it's not too big. It's got an underground storage there, whereas something like a red gum doesn't have that tuber. It's gonna drop limbs and it gets so much bigger. And when it does drop limbs, gosh, there's some weight behind each and every one of them.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Well, people go from, go get some arborist training if you're going to be doing that sort of work. I'm going to keep talking about pruning because I talked about this in the last podcast I recorded. I don't know when these are going to come out. But I got given these recently. I was chatting with Tony from Cut Above about these are anvil secateurs. And obviously you got your standard Felcos there, which are bypass. I had never used anvil secateurs. I still haven't used these. Right? So I've talked about them twice on the podcast, but people can guess these podcasts were recorded very soon after each other. But for those who didn't listen to the one with Attila, basically an anvil secateur will cut straight onto a kind of flat bottom end. So there's a sharp knife. It looks exactly the same as you would expect for a bypass, but it cuts on a flat end. It doesn't bypass the other side like scissors would, whereas your classic Felcos, they bypass. I have anvil loppers, and I like them because I found them a little bit easier, and there's less pressure or a less localized or focused pressure point on the backside of the plant, and so I wasn't getting as much bruising. And then I was talking to Tony about it, and he was like, "I'll send you some of these. Try them out." I haven't tried them out, but do you have opinions on anvil versus bypass or saws or whatever, any path you want to take it down when it comes to pruning tools?
Pruning tools, yeah. Get a good pair of secateurs and sharpen them. And I'm the worst at sharpening. I'm sorry, I'm a hypocrite. But yeah, and I'm also the worst at cleaning them between every cut. I'm not that person. I should be, but I'm just not. Hopefully a lot of people, we live in guilt about it, but it's like mower blades as well. I'm not the first one to sharpen it. But anyway, yeah, bypass are good because if they're nice and sharp and they are calibrated right so that they sort of just glide past each other, there's no space. As soon as there's a bit of a space, oh man.
Yep. Oh man.
Shred.
And that's what
they can't cut.
Sorry, V, I was just saying, that's what you get with cheap pairs. That's the difference often between a cheap pair and a good pair is that people will they'll cut two things side by side, and even in a review video or whatever, and they'll be like, they cut exactly the same. It's like, yeah, of course they cut exactly the same, but the two things you'll get the difference is how long does it take before you get a wobble in the handle, or you get a little bend, and then they're not cutting like scissors anymore. And the second thing is how hardy is the steel that's being used, because it'll get blunt. And as soon as it gets blunt, then you're using all that effort to cut more. You're going to get worse cuts. And when you get them fresh out of the box, both of them will be pretty much exactly the same.
That's a really good point. Yeah, out of the box side-by-side comparisons are very unhelpful. Like if I'm going to be doing anywhere between 20 to 100 cuts in a day, and that's if I'm not using it all the time. Like you'll be surprised how many cuts you make. If you just do a couple of roses, suddenly that's 30, 40 cuts right there. Like if you're doing that every day, yeah, it will wear out. I guess the other side from the hammer, what is it, the anvil style? So as you described, that blade sort of, instead of bypassing the bottom, whatever that thing is, the bottom. What do you call that? Anyway,
I call it the thing too.
The thing. So the blade on an anvil one, the blade, I guess, kind of like crushes, or doesn't crush, it cuts down and then it hits the surface like a chopping board. Whereas the bypass sort of goes straight through like a pair of scissors. So that anvil, they say it causes more bruising. Is that a big deal? It probably depends on the plant. May cause tissue death down to the next node or something like that. So it's probably not ideal. You probably, So, but if you're not getting that, then again, I'm not going to be the one who's going to be here being like, oh, anvil secateurs suck. There's a reason why they exist in the marketplace. I think Italian people love them. Is what I heard.
What
Felco?
These are Italian. Oh, who did you interview at Felco?
At Felco, Blaze,
Pascal. And his wager.
His name started with a V. Blaze Vino.
I
I
don't
can't
know.
remember. But
we had,
that was one of the early ones.
Falco came to the live podcast we did for our 100th episode with Tim the Lawnmower Man over here in Perth.
Luke Bennett's with them now.
Yes, he is. So, Luke used to be at Pelink, and we've had him on the podcast for Makers Month. I'm trying to get Falco on the podcast for Makers Month. Luke hasn't replied, mate. Luke, get your act together.
He's tricky to get in touch with. Shout out to Luke. He turned me down. I wanted to get Pelink to sponsor my podcast because I just thought they were like, I love that brand, like everything that they were doing. But anyway.
Yes, look, I don't think Pelink, we'll put it out there. I don't think Pelink had the budget or the intent to do social media stuff. So I don't think it was you. It wasn't a rejection of your looks or your style or anything like that.
Are you sure about that? But, have you seen me?
I can see you right now. By the way, people was like he wanted to get a haircut beforehand, and he was like, "Oh, I look grizzly," and all sort of stuff. And I was expecting something really bad, and then it was like, "Man, you look normal." If you hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have judged. Ringo Starr. I love Ringo. I love the Beatles. So anyway, Jilly came down and they showed me. I've got the Felco catalog over there, and that's why I want to get them for Makers Month, because they have like 16 different or more varieties of Felcos. So you got number 2 and number 7 and number 14 and. I was like, so what would you use for this? And Jilly was like, oh, you'd use number 11. And anyways, it was a crash course, and I wasn't able to absorb all of it. But I just it gave me the idea that one thing that she did say, which I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, is different when you're printing a lot, different styles suit different hand sizes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a fatigue element that if you just go for the number 2s, they might not be the best if you've got a small hand or a large hand or whatever it is. And then you got the rolling ones, which I've never used. I should, but they're supposed to be good for carpal tunnel and repetitive strain injuries. And so there's this whole world that I'm going down. I've just always had a pair of number 2s, and I've just cut them. And I bought them because people said Felco was great, and I guess they are. But So, but the thing is, so this is another one of my gripes. Let's go down this path. Education, formal education, say Cert 3, Cert 4 in the industry. The problem is the industry is so diverse that I don't feel you can cover the depth needed on specific roles to any sort of meaningful degree and then have a degree that is universal. So what I mean by that is if you've got a touch on landscaping, you can only do surface level. Then you touch on pruning, you can only do surface level, chemicals, surface level, soil, surface level, mowing and lawn maintenance, surface level. And then you go out and say you've done your Cert 3. And then somebody goes into a job, let's say turf management, and they're working for a council mowing lawns. It's like, well, okay, I don't really know much about this, but I have a qualification. I kind of feel like the qualifications, they're doing the best they can with what they can do, but are they really that valuable? So what are your thoughts?
Oh, you've opened a can of worms here. I really agree with you. So if you talk to some of the old heads, they'll tell you, and this isn't everyone, but this is just something that I've noticed, particularly people who went to Burnley, will say that the system, what do they say? It's being watered down. And you'll hear it time and time again. They say it's being watered down. There's, we had to learn this many plants, and now you only have to learn this many plants. And, naming plants it's one part of it. But it obviously goes deeper than that. I think informal education, like the resources you and I are providing, is the future. I think that, and I know TAFE, it's incredible because you get this A to Z kind of thing. Like, you start at the beginning as if you know nothing, and then we'll teach you a lot of stuff. I think there's definitely a place for it. It's not the only thing. I think that, informal education. I think if you really want to take your career seriously, you probably need a mentor, and you need the experience, and a mentor can help take you from where you are to where you need to be. So as I'm trying to get into horticulture media and writing and stuff like that, and less so using my hands and more so like using my mouth and like my writing and stuff. Um, an invaluable thing for me was one, networking with the Australian Institute of Horticulture, particularly, also with others like Landscaping Victoria. I had a bit to do with them. But also my mentor, Karen Smith, who's the editor for the Hort Journal, which is a magazine that I write for, Australia's best print horticulture industry magazine. In fact, it's our only industry horticulture magazine.
Okay, you can't say it's the best if it's the only one. I mean,
it is. It is the
it's
best.
true. I'm not arguing on the factuality of it, but it's a little bit. It's a little bit of an overplay on words there.
There are some. There's Landscape Contractor, which is a great magazine too, but they're very different, I guess. I'd say it's my favourite magazine, but I write for them, so. The only print magazine. I also write for Hort Insights, which is the Australian Institute of Horticulture magazine, every now and then, but it's not a print one. Anyway, so yeah, my mentor, Karen Smith, she's just taken me, like she just having conversations with me, she has helped me, like, she's further down the road than me. She's seen what the roads are. She's like, oh, take a left at Smith Street.
Are you calling her old?
She's older than me. She's not old. Hang on. Did I say old?
I know. No,
Did I say
you said she's further. She said
she's further down the track than me. Well, she is. That's
I'm just trying to embarrass you.
You're trying to ruin my relationship with Karen. No, one day I would hope to be like that for someone else, because she has helped me so much. Like, she was the one who said, go and get involved with the AIH. Like, that took me so far in my career. Like, even just being around them, then talking with them, then they liked what I was about, so then I became a council member. Then I got an award last year, and I've been nominated for another award this year. For what? I don't know. But someone's nominated me for an award, which is pretty cool. But yeah.
That's great. That's awesome, man. Well done.
Get a mentor, because they've been where you want to be, and they can tell you where to take your turns and which way to go. I'd say that. So do you know what? Get a mentor.
But really, what you're trying to say is you said exactly what you wanted to say, but it's very similar. What I'm trying to get at, it's incredibly similar to what back in the day, before there was such a thing as university, and you were a blacksmith or whatever. That's essentially what would happen: is you'd learn your trade in a more apprenticeship style, but in the old sense of the word, under somebody who'd been there, done that. Yeah, exactly. And there wasn't a formal training element where you hit your degree at the end, but it was like at a certain point they're like, yeah, you're ready. You'll do it. And there's a kind of knowledge. Here's the thing: like with my articles, I have become aware of, especially more doing the podcast, my articles get a lot of reads. We had 30,000 reads last month. And
wow, that's great.
I feel like my knowledge is not worth 30,000 reads a month, because the reads are coming from across the country. And I'm kind of like, I'm getting to the point where I kind of realize that the advice is good, right? And I worked on it, and I did some stuff that was, like it was. I'm not unhappy with my articles, but I feel like someone in Darwin's going to read it, and it's actually useless. And then they're going to be like, "Oh, I'm going to do this and this and this." Like, one of the things is we always talk about how much water you should be giving the plants, and I keep writing that you should be watering it X amount of times a week, and I've never written in there like, if you're not getting any rainfall. It's like assumed, because that's my life. And I've realized that, and I'm like, what? Like, that's not good advice. Someone's going to read that who gets water, and then they're going to put their sprinklers on X amount of time a week and measure how much water they're putting out, because that's exactly what we do. We measure how many mil we're getting, and we put it out there because we've got water restrictions. And it's just not relevant anymore. And so I've got to work with, anyway, what I'm getting at is I've got to work with people in other areas and then go, hey, read this thing, and then maybe put your comments in red or something like that, or a different color, and we'll go through, we'll discuss it, we'll make it better, because it's getting to a point where that's the case. And what we're actually doing, for those who are interested, is we've never put ads on those articles. I've never made money directly from those articles. And now I'm going to put ads on the articles and then just take the money and go to somebody who I like and be like, hey, you're in New South Wales. All right, read this thing. I've got a small budget. Spend some time. I'll pay you. Read this thing and make it better, because there's enough people reading it now. I almost feel a responsibility to make it good. Whereas before it was like a hobby for me educating myself,
That's how I started mine too. my blog, my first blog before I made the podcast, the Plants Grow Here blog. That's exactly what I did. I find, so in my work with Osbreed, I get to work with a lot of growers and also landscape designers and architects. So it's like both kind of sides of the industry in a way. It's like the dreamers and the boots, as I said. So they're very different people culturally, very different like cultures within those two groups.
Yep.
Like nurseries are they have passion. A lot of them have a lot of passion, but they don't grow the plants they love. They grow the plants that the market wants.
That's so just exactly.
Whereas the landscape architect's like, oh, I like this. Oh, I like that. Like it's awesome. Like we need both of those. But I find that a lot of the time people want prescriptions. So like, oh, how much water do I do this? And I'm like, no. This is what water does. So I'll I guess, and this is why my podcast isn't for everyone. Like if you're looking for a prescription on what to do, then do that. But what I do is I help you see through the matrix so you can see the green dots and stuff floating down so that when you look at something, you can see it. Because, we don't all see the same thing when we look at a garden, right? Like someone just sees green and then I can name all the plants in it and then someone else looks at it and then they're looking at the mulch and like we all see different things and we only see what we know. Yep. We don't see what we don't know. And so that's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help you to see it so that then you can make the decision and be like, oh, so I have rainfall here, so I don't need irrigation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Or like,
which is tricky.
maybe a tap timer and an impact sprinkler in the back shed in case of emergency, but a full irrigation system may not be needed. Whereas, like I said, every single article, I have a question: how much water does X need? Because my most popular articles are called "Everything You Need to Know About Blank." Right?
You can just put a little asterisk in Perth.
Well, that's the thing. I haven't even done that. And then he's like, "Oh, well, how much?" The other, look, I've got to make it a little bit more. You got to get the balance right, which is not easy, between super nerdy that no one reads it and readable and concise. Readable and concise to the point where grandma can read it. That's fine. I got a message from somebody who was a grandma. They found my Facebook from the article because my name's on the article. And they said, your article on cordyline is the best thing I've ever read on cordyline. Thank you so much. Does it come in a hard copy? It's the only person who ever messaged me. Right. And I was like, well, thank you. Also, if that's it's like you said before, it could be the best, exactly on the hard copy side, but you could be like, it's the best article ever because it's the only one you've ever read. Yeah. But then that's the thing. That's one of the comments that got me like, I don't think it's that good. If somebody starts asking me questions about cordylines, I'm going to be like, I'm not really an expert on cordylines. But then I realize I've just written an article that to randoms on the internet makes me look like an expert in cordylines. And then I've at this moral conundrum because that article alone just went nuts and it's getting like 2,500 reads a month on that single article. And then I'm like, I like cordylines, but that's too many reads for my knowledge. And now everybody thinks I'm a genius. And
it's not about that. You're just one step ahead. You're just it's like what Karen is to me. It's like Karen shows me the next step. You're just showing them the next step. But you think someone like Karen doesn't also look up to someone? It just keeps going. It's like a babushka.
Yeah, true.
It just keeps going on up, and down. It's like a human ladder. We're all helping each other up one step at a time and reaching back down to the next person.
Well, okay, yes. But the other thing I've done, which I've realized now, is I've titled them everything you need to know about.
We all know what that means. We all know that.
It's kind of like a catchy title that gets people to click it, and then you go,
and it is everything they need to know.
I have 30
Do they need
articles.
To know the botanical,
No, and that's what I've tried to do. It's not everything you could possibly know about acacia, but I'm going to get one day. This is my great fear. Someone's going to read an article and go, this Luke guy's not that smart. And anyone who listens to the podcast is completely well aware of that. But, there's something different about the line. Anyways, so look, we're monetizing it for the sake of being able to actually fund people to actually make it to the standard. And then what we're going to do is we're going to film them. We're going to take the articles. I'm going to film them. And I'm going to do it most of the time not alone. Again, it's going to cost money, and we're going to be like, everything you need to know. I haven't written one on roses because I know jack squat about roses. But if I write everything you need to know about roses, I'll do it with a rose expert. And then we'll do a video together and remake the article in video form and put it on YouTube. and then it'll
Yep.
be like both boxes ticked. And it doesn't even have to be a money maker. As if it passes the, you're in the black at some point on the accounting spreadsheet, and you're helping people. That's my goal that we're doing this season. So this, not this year because it takes time, but that's one of the things I'm passionate about doing this year, and I think it'll be super fun for me, but also probably a resource. Because back to what we started this podcast with the short answers are usually not the good answers. My articles are sort of 1,500 to 3,000 words, and you're trying to cover everything. And I feel like you're in the same boat. Like you go deeper than I do, and more nerdy, and definitely more helpful for someone who is really looking for a deep answer, the professional, the contractor. Whereas my stuff's more for homeowners who ask basic stuff. But it's kind of like trying to make it the information out there and as helpful and as widely spread as possible, because all love and affection for Better Homes and Gardens. We're actually having somebody from there on like next week, but the time constraints that they have on that show mean that it's, you can't quite say everything. And I'm happy for my YouTube video to be 45 minutes long if it needs to be. That's my waffling over.
Oh, I've got so many things I want to say about that. I just want to say as well, like, just because I'm doing like I said, like trying to see through the matrix kind of stuff with plants, like that's a certain kind of person. It's very unhelpful to that nana that you were talking about, like Doris, a pensioner who just wants to know how to prune her roses, doesn't need to know the full etymology of the name. Or like if they don't need to know about the fact that they're related to apples and pears or strawberries or blackberries. It's just not important to them. They just need to know where to prune. They need a prescription. So,
Yes.
like, I've just decided to go in a different direction with mine because that's just the way my mind works. Like I'm always, some people are like the mechanic and they're sitting in there with the car and they pull it apart. I'm like that, but with ideas. And so like, I'm like that with plants. Like I just want to get under the hood and figure out how a plant works. And I guess my listeners are along with that journey, but I think a lot of people would find it really boring and unhelpful.
Yeah. No, but look, see, I like your stuff more than I like the surface level stuff. But that's because
you're on the same journey as me, though.
You're
a
what I'm saying is I've been in the
diehard.
industry for 15 years, and that's what I love. And if someone starts talking surface level, you can relate to it, but you get bored of it. Excuse me, you get bored of it
You
because
probably heard
you
of the
want.
same stuff 100 times.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
What did you call root rot?
Yeah, root
the
rot.
other day. But what did you call it? What was the actual word for it?
Phytophthora is one of the strains. It's only one of them. It's a shorthand for root rot. Phytophthora.
Cool. I see it. I'm just like root rot. But then again, why don't I know that word? Because there's this thing called sand and it drains really well. And so that's all we've got. We don't really get root rot. You could leave your sprinklers on permanently for the rest of time and the water would still drain. You still wouldn't get root rot. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So the next thing I want to talk about, we're flying through this, by the way. So this is one that I really wanted to talk about. You said on LinkedIn, a lot of new hip soil amendments make a lot of claims, but at the end of the day, most of them are carbon, nutrients, and probiotics. And I love that conversation between marketing and actual results. And the problem is, it is so hard to do tests and trials at home, and people buy the marketing. And that's kind of Bunnings' business model. So take it away. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I get pitched by soil amendments all the time. It's like, the power of biology. It's like, you mean gardening? It's like, and it's like, or it's just like soldier fly larvae. It's like, yeah, but that's in compost too. It's like, it's just, so when you break it down, it's like, what are we talking about? We're talking about nutrients, probiotics, and just carbon to help the soil. So those three things are really important. Are we breaking new ground here? No, this is what our ancestors did. Are there more probiotics in one than another? Like I'll still use the dynamic lifter or the other one, rooster booster. Like I love them because there's heaps of organics in it. But it's like I can buy a big bag of rooster booster, or I could buy a little tiny tub of fly larvae poo. like, is there a huge difference between them? No, maybe not. I mean, I still love worm castings. I'll throw some worm castings in there, and I will buy little bits and pieces. And everything is slightly different. It's like diversity begets diversity, right? Like on a fundamental level. So the more microbes, I want more microbes in the ground because it's a battleground. So I want the more good fungus and the more good bacteria to fight off the bad ones, and I want more good insects to fight off the bad one, so-called bad.
Yeah.
So that's the point I'm coming at it through. But what you said is the marketing. They're throwing fancy words on it to confuse us, like the power of biology or full spectrum and all these things. It's like everything's like that. Compost is like I could take a dump down in the garden and it's the same thing.
Yes. So what I feel as well is coming back to you've got to come back to what are your actual goals, right? So I have in this warehouse, because there are natural lights from the roof, because there's the plastic see-through, roofing stuff that there's the natural light in. This is just such a perfect environment for so many of these plants. Most of them, I have never fertilized them. Most of them are thriving without it, and I might put a little bit down. Some of them I'd like to grow. I've got a wall over there. Oh, maybe I'll be able to twist this enough to show you. But on the back wall, you can't really see it.
It's a little blurry because I guess the recording will be clearer, but because we're live in the discussion, I think that they've reduced the pixel rate. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Anyway, so what I was getting at is I've got vines on the back wall, and I want to make a curtain, essentially, of vines.
Ooh,
and one of them is very close to touching the floor now, which is exciting, but a lot of them are very slow. So for them, I'm going to try and put down some fertilizer. Well, I've got to straighten my camera up now. I want to put down some fertilizer because I want them to grow faster. But most of the plants I've got don't need to grow faster. So they don't actually need this sort of stuff.
Purpose? Yeah.
When we had Attila on the last podcast, we talked about citrus trees, and we talked about fertilizing. And, people say, citrus trees are really hungry. You want to put some fertilizer down to help them. It's true, right? And you'll see the yellow leaves discoloring. Usually it's a sign that they're hungry. Okay. But why do you have a citrus tree? If you have it to look good, okay, you put your fertilizer down to make all the leaves colors, nice dark color. But if you wanted oranges, I betcha if you've got an established citrus tree, you're getting more oranges than you really need. You're getting more oranges than you need. If you've got a little one, you're trying to make it grow faster, okay, put down some nutrients. It probably help. But what I'm getting at here is how much product do you actually need? And one of the things I'm finding, each of these articles I write, I'm like, you don't really, because I have what fertilizer is good for, say, lily-pilly. And you're like, do you need fertilizer for lily-pilly? Unless you've put it in a small pot and you're trying to make it grow fast to fill out a hedge. Once it gets that size, they're fine. Maybe a little bit.
And why do you want to do more pruning anyway?
Oh, that's the point. It's like maybe a bit of disease resistance if you've got if they're a little bit weak, but it's also like, okay, if you just put some compost in the soil to start with. So what I'm getting at is how much of it is really necessary and how much of it is there's a company that's trying to sell a product. And so they will point out, yeah, this is helpful. You get more fruit. It's like, did you need any more fruit? Like, have you got enough lemons? So that's
so good. Can I go on a little rant here while we're talking about fertilizer?
How dare you?
We need to stop calling them. We need to stop calling them native fertilizers. It's rubbish. Like, again, native plants aren't that different from other plants. When we talk about native fertilizers, we're talking about low phosphorus. Which plants need low phosphorus? Proteaceae members. So that's your native grevilleas, your native waratahs, your native banksias, your native hakeas, your native proteas. Oh, wait. Proteas are from South Africa. So are leucodendrons. So are leucospermums. Why do we call them native fertilizers? They should be Proteaceae fertilizers. Your lily-pillies, your callistemons, your westringias, these would all prefer normal fertilizer. So
okay, so
that's my
that's the other thing. Once you start using any Latin term for any plant, like the general population is like, this is beyond me. I don't know what this
Okay, so
means.
Proteaceae is a family. So you know how you've got like I don't know plant families that well. I don't know how that works. But let's say like
No,
you've
you do.
got
You're not better than most of us.
no, I don't, because I was going to go down to apes, and then I was like, no, don't know canines. No, I don't know how that works. So, but with plants,
Okay.
like let's say you've got the myrtle family, Myrtaceae. That's a big
Yeah.
umbrella. Underneath that, now we've got different genuses or genera. So we've got the Callistemon genus, which is bottle brushes.
Yeah.
We've got the Eucalyptus genus, which is eucalypts. We've got the Syzygium genus, which is lily pillies. So all of these belong to the same family, and then under each of those genuses are different species. So it goes
Yeah.
family, genus, species. So the
Yeah.
Proteaceae family has the genuses or genera Grevillea, Banksia, Waratah. They're all on the same level if you think about the tree. So it's like Proteaceae,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
next level down is the genuses, and then underneath that you've got the family. So anything belonging to that Proteaceae family, they've adapted to really crappy soils in Australia and southern Africa. So they can suck out all that last phosphorus out of the soil with roots called Proteaceae roots. Now those roots, the downside of them are that they burn really easily when there's too much phosphorus. Hence why we
Yeah.
have so-called native fertilizers. But they shouldn't be called native fertilizers. They should be called Proteaceae fertilizers because our other native plants would love that phosphorus. And now we're paying more for less because we're paying for native fertilizers that have less nutrients in them, particularly one macronutrient. It would be like us cutting out fats, carbs, or proteins. It's like, I know a lot of people say to do that, but we have three macronutrients that we need: fat, carbon, and fat, carbohydrates, and protein, which are all types of carbon
Yeah.
which come from plants.
Yep.
So anyway, yeah, they need the NPK. They need the full spectrum. Most plants.
Yes, but there's some that are super sensitive. And the phosphorus stuff as well with lawns is another case where like a lawn fertilizer. So here's okay. Most lawn fertilizers are actually really good hedge fertilizers too, because the goal of a lawn fertilizer is trying to promote a leaf growth in a beautiful. And so now it depends. You can't be too flippant with it because too much fertilizer is not great for most plants, whereas lawns can love a lot of fertilizer. But it's kind of like most hedges in a residential setting are right on the edge of a lawn. And so if you are broadcasting a fertilizer, the hedge is taking it anyway. Do you actually need to then put a specific fertilizer for the hedge? No. And the higher nitrogen, higher potassium, and a few trace elements that you're going to get in your generic, it's going to be great. It's going to be great for a hedge. And then people, what they'll do is they'll get the marketing and they'll go, okay, what's my hedge fertilizer that I'm going to use? And if you look at the nutrient breakdown, it's actually very similar in most cases to a lawn fertilizer. And so it's exactly what you're saying. So I do go down the nerdy route with the lawn fertilizer applications, and it's kind of like, and it does make a difference in how you, like we just released a podcast with Kevin Booth from Living Turf about it, how you maintain it and stuff. But lawns are pretty unique in that, and a lot of the plants, you're right, like you could throw down a pretty similar type of product for a lot of them, and maybe a lot of them don't even need it. But then having said that, I'm going to have an open mind because I have had a conversation with Nutrog and they're going to come on soon. And we can say, tell me about bush tucker, because Daniel Fuller.
Yeah. Daniel Fuller just trashed native fertilizers. Yeah, but how do you, as a fertilizer company, how do you say it? You can't break the mold, and then also, so we're going to say, all right, on your Banksias you need this, but then next door the lily pillies need that. It's like protecting the Banksia probably comes first, But
Yes.
what's
No,
your
I
as a
agree.
turf man? Because with
Yeah.
turf, it's so different to what I do because I'm like my lawn is the one that has all the weeds in it. Like I'm not the turf guy, so I like not my field. But how do you feel about organics in turf? Because like I'm big on like get as much organic into the soil, but then if I talk to someone who's on like a golf course or something, they're like, no, we don't want organics in the soil.
Yeah. So that's the difference between a playing surface and a home lawn.
Right.
So a playing surface wants sand because of drainage, and in a place like on the East Coast where there's a lot of rain, you will get fungal diseases if you hold too much water in the soil. And so there are actually machines that are sand injectors. Have you ever seen one of these?
No.
So they're super expensive machines. You're talking like
Right.
$20,000 for a walk behind machine. And what they have, so I'll try and describe it. Think about a verti mower, or actually no, think about like 10 mini trenches, right, at the front of this machine, and they're digging in trenches, say 10 centimeters deep, and it takes out the sand, and then there's 10 pipes with a sand bucket at the top, so like a wheelbarrow at the top, and as it's digging out the soil, it's injecting pure white washed sand down into the soil profile. And they do that on greens all the time, because greens that have too much organic matter in them become soft, and soft greens are not good for play. But every other environment, and it's the same. Sorry, it's the same for any playing surface where you're running on it a lot, because soft turf is injury prone turf. You want hard soil that holds together, because if it slips from underneath you, that's how you're doing your ACL. So stadium managers and people like that. So Perth Optus Stadium is a pure sand base, and they liquid fertilize all the time. I told you on the phone before, Matt Oliver at Suncourt Stadium, he is liquid fertilizing, or he's fertilizing on average twice a week. And that's because the soil has nothing in it. They have the budget to do that, and the soil is simply there for drainage, so no fungal issues, and play can continue. There's no puddles, and for the sake of injury management. So you get out of that world and you get into home lawn, and you're like, no, organics are good, because organics hold the moisture in the soil, and there's a certain ratio. Too much will cause a lot of fungal issues with shade and stuff, but you want more organic. So I actually contacted the business that sells those sand injectors. I didn't actually get through to the right person. I needed to do it more, because I was curious, and I don't think it'll work, but I was curious as to whether or not I could put compost through it and do the exact opposite it's designed to do. Right? So take compost and put compost
into the root zone.
Exactly, but I think the problem will be that compost clumps, and I don't think it'll freely flow through those pipes, whereas sand will. But Will Bowden, who does Osbreed's job in New Zealand for, so he's a plant breeder for cool season grasses in New Zealand, for PGG Wrightson or PG. Okay, the names escape me now. But anyways, so he came on the podcast and he told me about biochar, which I didn't know about before he came on the podcast. And that sounded to me like I could mix biochar with sand and then put it through a sand injector to get my percentages right. And then I've got my water holding capacity in the soil. But then there's another product called, what's it called? It's behind me somewhere. Terracotum, sorry.
Yeah.
And terracotum. Have you seen this terracotum stuff?
Yeah. It's great.
So,
right? It's just like water, it's like high quality water crystals.
Yes, exactly. So they have reached out because so Strata Green are one of the sponsors for my articles now, and Strata Green sell it, and essentially, I want to do a podcast on it at some stage, because it's like the world's most expensive bag of fertilizer. It's like $500 for 20 kilos or something like that. But the idea is you mix it in before you lay the lawn, and it's got water holding crystals and really long lasting, like 1 year long lasting fertilizer. And the idea is that by mixing it in, you're giving your turf a year of food and all the water holding capacity. And then after that, from a residential setting, it can kind of, the roots grow deep. It creates this ecosystem in there with everything else, and then it's kind of fine after. My questions are: is that a warm season grass or a cool season grass thing? What standard are you holding for your turf? But it's anyways. What I'm getting at is that Graydon sand injector probably could put that product through mixed in with sand as well. So all these. So anyways. Yeah, people are going to steal my business model idea now, because that was, my private idea. It's now on the internet. But go invest the $20,000 or $30,000 it is for the machine on something that might not work. Is a little bit of a, I don't know.
Ideas are cheap, mate. It's the doing the work that's what separates it.
But that's for our WA climate. so your big question was, what do I think about organics? We want to put as much organics in, and the biggest problem is that the only way to do it in a lawn that already exists is essentially top dressing, and then you don't fix the problem because it's only on the top of the surface. So then the way that
biology
we
brings
try,
it down. It takes time, but the worms will come up, eat it.
well,
bring
that's
it
the
down.
problem. It's
Yeah.
people are impatient, but yeah, and I agree. The biology will bring it down. But so then here's my theory now at the moment. Yeah, not for what I want. We go back to phosphorus. Phosphorus encourages root growth. Phosphorus is also terrible for the environment when it leaches. Sandy soils leach a lot, right? So how do you balance getting as much root growth? Because what happens in turf is the roots grow and then they die. And that's, in my eyes, a great way to add organic matter to the soil, is to encourage as much root growth as possible. Surely that would have the same amount of time to build it up or similar as top dressing, So I'm kind of exploring all these ideas where it's like, if you are putting in products for a year and a half, 2 years that are really heavy on the root growth, right? And so, we're using a lot of liquids. People know that. So the match play range from the lawn shed or living turf, which is essentially, there's mycorrhizal fungi in it, there's microbes in it. It's most of the products we're using are certified organic. We're trying to get stuff into the soil so that in the long term we're benefiting everybody. But I don't know if that works yet or not. Like, it's the people who are using at the highest end of the market, who are using these products the most, do not care about that. They're doing playing surfaces. There's not many people who are trying to do high-end turf maintenance in a residential scene and thinking of novel ways to put compost into the soil.
I've got a lot to say about that, man. Have we got time for me to just go on a little rant here?
Go for all the rants. I feel like
I want to hit.
This podcast is Daniel's rant and then Luke's rant and then Daniel's rant and then Luke's rant.
Having a rant. That's good. That's good.
You go. Okay. Give me all the rants you've got.
Carbon exists on a spectrum, right? So, first of all, we've got the trees and the plants that take it out of the carbon dioxide.
Sorry.
So what's that?
Sorry, I made a bad joke. Start again. You said carbon exists on a. So the problem is there's a little bit of a delay.
Spectrum.
So you said carbon exists on a spectrum. I said a bit like autism, but there was a gap when I said it, but it probably wasn't a gap when you kept talking. So I've just interrupted you on the podcast for no good. That was a horrible joke. We're getting cancelled.
I would never do that.
Anyway, keep going.
No, yeah.
Start again.
You know how photosynthesis works, right? So plants take carbon dioxide out of the air, then they push the oxygen out. That's what we breathe in. Well, that carbon is what they make their body out of, and that's what creates proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So you've got all of these things in different plant parts, from the leaves to the fruits to the seeds. All those things are in plants. Then animals eat them. The microbes break things down. Those microbes themselves have things in them. And then we digest the dead microbes, all the rest. So that's what it is. Carbon exists on a spectrum. So on one end, we've got like leaves. So we call that labile carbon, which means it readily breaks down. So it's like a microbe eats it, and then all of a sudden it's carbon dioxide again. Which within a couple of days, it's carbon dioxide again. It breaks down really quickly, particularly in Queensland where we've got rain and humidity and heat. So that breaks things down faster. Then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, stable carbon. So something like biochar is like that. Because of the process gone through low heat, low oxygen, it breaks it down into this really stable form that insects don't actually eat it. There's no real nutrients in it. It's just straight up carbon. Well, they may eat it, but they don't digest it. It's not reduced out of farts and out of poo into the atmosphere again. It stays stable. And in fact, did you know that the Amazon rainforest is man-made? That's their version of a castle. They built this forest, and how they did it was they made terra preta. So they took all their poo for how many thousands of years, I don't know, but they burnt it down into biochar and kept planting it. They've made the most rich soil, which is still the same today. It's still so powerful today because all that carbon is not going anywhere. And that carbon is what sticks soil particles together like glue. And that's really, really, really good for plant health. So that carbon, it's like a sponge, right? So it can soak up water, but it doesn't hold it. It can release the water really easily. So you can have roots that are getting air and water in the same sort of patch of soil.
Yes.
So so for me in my philosophy, I want lots of stable carbon. So biochar, if I can, get it into the soil on day one, and then I also want the labile carbon, which is breaking down really quickly and delivering nutrients. So if I turn up to a really crappy site with really heavy clay soil and it's all exposed, my first instinct is to rip it all up, put carbon down into it, and start again. But if I come to a garden that's already been established for a few years and it's had lots of roots growing in it and it's being covered and protected, I don't want to disturb that soil because there's so many fungal pathways in there and stuff that I want to protect, because otherwise we're starting from scratch again. Once we dig it all up, everything dies and we've got to start again, and it favours bacteria over fungus. Nothing wrong with bacteria in general, nothing wrong with fungus in general, but fungus is more associated with like established ecosystems. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to really establish an ecosystem, because that's for me, like in my journey, that's the way that we're building pest resistant gardens. Biodiversity inherently is pest resistance to some degree. So yeah, I guess that's what I have to say about carbon is get some stable forms and get some labile forms and get that full spectrum in.
Yeah. So back to the soil amendments. Do you? I guess it's a very hard question to answer without trials, without actually doing these trials. But because your comment originally that I read out before, I'll read it out again. So because it's been a while. But a lot of hip new soil amendments make a lot of claims, but at the end of the day, most of them are carbon, nutrients, and probiotics. So we're essentially critiquing there the difference between the branding, but as a general rule, are you still in favor of those sorts of products?
We want it. Yeah, we want it. I want to pay a good rate for it, though. I don't want some company to tell me the power of biology and then for me to get all hypnotized and think, oh, I need to do this instead of compost or instead of worm castings. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I'm not sponsored by Strata Green or by Terracotta, but I have had Nathan Strom on the podcast. I think he's left the company now. But yeah, I'm a believer in Terracotta. It's really expensive, but if in sandy soil, if you can get something in there to hold the moisture, whether that's biochar or whether that's Terracotta, I don't know what the cost. I haven't put them side by side. I don't know what the ratios are to get a similar thing. But, even though terracotta is a synthetic thing, it's actually not organic. As you said, the roots will provide that organic matter if there's an incentive for them to continue growing. So roots, there's two things with roots. One is the stability factor. That's what they're seeking, stability. So if there's wind coming from this direction, they'll grow roots in that direction to try and stabilize themselves. And also they're seeking resources, which is water and nutrients. So roots are adventitious, so the more water we have deeper down in the soil, the deeper the roots will grow. If we have no water down in the deep soil, if we water for 10 seconds every day, all those roots are going to be on the top of that surface. Yep. Whereas if we water deeply every 2 weeks, we're encouraging roots to go down. So again, it just like, it always just depends. And so it's like I want a workshop exist like specific conditions and then work with you to figure out like, oh, what's the best thing for you? I don't want to give like a prescription of like, oh, this is always how it's going to work.
So here's one of the things that I've thought about doing. So what you talk about encouraging deep root growth is I've actually thought about, say you're saying taking a lawn from day one, right? I wonder if you would be better off on a budget to put organic matter 30 centimeters down, 20 centimeters down, sand the rest, pure sand. And the reason is you'd get the drainage, but eventually if you can get the roots to eventually grow once you lay the new lawn to that 30 centimeters, that's where the water would hold. So it's kind of like doing what you're saying, but you're getting the best of both worlds where you get the drainage of the soil, of the sand, and then you get the water holding capacity of the real soil. But I'm sure people have tried that before and they go, well, here's the problem with that. But I kind of brainstorm all these ideas because the sand is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that it does drain and it's got benefits, but because, so here's the thing. I believe we have so much sand because we have so little rain. If we had a lot of rain, you would have naturally had a lot of plant growth, and that growth over a very long period of time would have meant more decaying plant matter, which would have been or more organic matter in the soil over time. Whereas in WA, where we are, specifically Perth, is very dry, and so there's not that much rain. Because there's not that much rain, let's see this summer rain, there's not that much rain, that means there's not that much plant growth, and over a very long period of time there hasn't been as much decaying leaf matter, decaying root matter to add the organics into the soil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd say like the leaf matter and stuff, that's pretty labile, so it'd probably disappear. With sand, sand is actually, people think that organic matter is soil, and it's not. Soil particles are broken down rocks. So like sand is made of quartz. So if you've got quartz and you really wear that down, you get these big particles, which are sand. Like most sand particles you can actually see with the naked eye. Whereas clay particles are broken down basalt. So when it breaks down, they're too small to see the individual particles with your eye. And so that's why sand has those drainage properties. It's because these big chunks of sand have lots of pathways through them. Whereas because clay particles are so small, there's less pathways for the water to go through. So it's like ends up like slimy, like potter's clay. But yeah, I mean, certainly what you're saying makes sense. Like, but I would also say like organic matter breaks down way more quickly than what you think, particularly when the soil is uncovered and the sun's beaten down on it. It just all gets released as carbon dioxide.
Yep. No, I agree. So I don't know, like somebody out there, some soil scientists, which I would like to. There's a few I've got to get.
That's the funny thing, like, people say, like, I know a lot, but that's because I talk to really smart people. Like, I don't actually know a lot. I feel like I'm a generalist. Like, I can have a conversation with the experts, and then I can, like, explain the fundamentals of, like, lots of different things. But, like, I'm never going to be the specialist in soil. Like, don't ask me like, ask me what to do, and I'll tell you to get a soil test and then take it to a soil scientist. You know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to be the one to be like, oh, you've got this much molybdenum, and that's what this means. Like,
the molybdenum's always a problem, isn't it?
yeah, and the whatever it is, like that's one of the only ones I know other than NPK. Like,
whenever I go to a soil scientist, they keep saying boron.
Yeah,
or maybe
boron,
it's moron.
or manganese.
It's boron or moron. Those two words get called around when I'm in the room.
I'm definitely one of those.
Yeah. No, I feel like if someone was going to put the word expert, I would accept the term expert in this niche. Residential lawn care for clients in Perth, Western Australia, in that niche. I'm like, I feel like I could count myself among a group of experts. If somebody is like, I need a residential lawn care expert who does small areas in Perth, Western Australia. But if you're like, oh, I want an expert in turf care in Western Australia, it's like, I'm not your man anymore. You know, like I only know in that little niche. That's where I'm happy. You know, I'll start getting out. But the thing is, like, okay, so do you know of Banara nurseries over there, over where you are? So they're massive.
That's where you are, aren't they, Banara?
Yeah. They're massive.
Yeah.
So I'm on their website, and if you go on their website, you click plants, and then you don't click the in stock, you just go general. There's over 2,000 listings on the Banara website. How can you know everything about every single one? Like people, like I know guys who are hobbyists on chilies and just growing chilies, which, like not even capsicums, just chilies. And there's all these different nuances, and they breed them and they try and get something that's hot or flavorsome or to their liking. And they love it. And I've met multiple people who love that sort of stuff. And then you go talk to them and you realize you know nothing about that entire group of things. And you're like, like people could read your articles on the internet, and they feel like, because you have articles in the podcast or whatever, it's like, this guy knows this stuff. It's like, bro, when I talk to a chili person, I'm an idiot. Yeah. There's 2,000 varieties. That's a grouping of plants, but there's hundreds and hundreds of those, acacias, and then like roses. Again, like I feel like an idiot on roses. I really don't know what I'm doing. But then if a client comes to me, it's like, oh, do you know what to do with a rose? Yeah, I know from in the client's perspective. But I talk to someone who breeds them, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I feel like that over and over and over again in the industry. And I one of the things I get at is, I think, and tell me your experience, I think people in the lawn and garden industry in general are actually really on average, because there's jerks everywhere, they're actually quite humble. And I think it's because there's so much we don't know. And at some point, we've all dug a hole for money. And we've all, if we've been mowing lawns, we've all mowed over some dog poo. And we've all done something like that. And there's a humbling nature to getting on your knees and pulling out weeds or something like that. But those two sides of it, I think the industry it's quite collaborative. It's quite encouraging. There's jerks everywhere in every industry. But on average, you go to mining where everyone's about the money, and it's not like that at all. What's your experience?
Oh yeah, plant people are the best people. I will say some of the biggest geniuses in any industry also happen to be some of the biggest a-holes, and that's just the way it goes. Like sometimes genius comes with personality things, but I'm not one of those people where I'm like, any personality flaw means I can't have anything to do with you. I'll kind of like just be like, okay, so you're kind of an a-hole. All right, like that's okay. I don't need to be this or that. Like I can still get along with you and learn from you and still collaborate with you. Like that's your thing that I have to forgive. I'm gonna have my thing that I'm gonna need you to forgive for me. Like I'm kind of like, yeah, like I sound great on a podcast where it's all expansive ideas, but when it comes to certain things like remembering to take the bin out every Friday, like I can really be bad at that sort of stuff, like organizational stuff. Like I hear the truck coming, I'm like, oh shoot, I've got to run downstairs and then grab the bin. Like I can be quite disorganized in some way. So everyone's going to have something, but I think in general, plant people are the best people. Everyone says it, everyone knows it. Like you say, like we're down to earth, literally down to earth people. So
in the earth, below the earth, if you've got to dig a big enough tree.
Yeah, it is humbling. Yeah, I completely agree with you. No, I think plant people are the best people. And I had something else to say there too, but now I've lost it. You said something really insightful. Anyway.
I don't. That's the first time anyone said that. But... You said something insightful. I'm going to write that down. Somebody said that about me on a podcast. Oh. Mate, I once got to level 1,000 on Candy Crush back in the day. I used to play that a lot, and I joked that I was going to put that on my resume because I felt like that was actually an achievement. Yeah, so there's some 40 and 50-year-old women out there who are level 5,000 or something on Candy Crush. Anyway, I haven't played that for a while. I don't even know where that came from.
What you put on your resume? Some of the stuff we put on our resume. But
mate, actually, look, we're almost at. So you go.
No. I was going to say, if you have done anything, like people don't realize how important that resume is. Like if you've done something like, instead of putting yard waste into the green bin, let's start putting into a compost pile. Put that on your resume. Just say, I converted a waste product into a resource. Like how good does that sound on your resume? It shows you're proactive. So I think people make the most boring resumes, and I think we should be tooting our own horns a lot more.
As somebody who hires people, if you want to have a good resume, send through a video, a 30-second video if you can. Like you don't know how much that make you stand out because you just read a resume, especially for people who don't have that much industry experience. I've had a few people who like you go talk to them and they've done 15 years in, say, I don't know, mining in Perth, and they want to get out of the industry, and they're like, oh, I love my home garden, I love my lawn, I'd love to get into this. And you look at it and you go, mate, it's just too risky. Like I'm reading your resume and you probably could work. And a lot of time I'll give that person a quick phone call to understand them. But somebody who then puts in a video, hey, this is about me and it's tailored to that business. I'm applying for Silverstone Gardening. I want to work for you. This is why, this is a little bit about me. And you're like, oh, I get a much better feel for them on that. And like, the internet is changing everything, especially with AI and stuff. You can write a great resume with AI. And what that means is that everyone's got a great resume with AI, which is like, with
it's a level field. There's no advantage there. There was for the early adopters, but not anymore.
So then you got to stand out some way, and I think those in-person videos probably do that.
I love
do you know what, mate? We are almost at 2 hours, and that flew by like it was 35 minutes.
We've got to do this again. We've got to do this again. Just this free chat was great. Like usually I'll write up questions, and I'd sort of thought of doing that for this episode. You sent me a few questions. We haven't touched on any of that. We've just literally but I still feel like we've talked about a lot of like plant stuff. Like I don't like sometimes when I get interviewed in podcasts, it's about me, and I feel really awkward talking about myself. I feel much more comfortable talking about the work itself, and also I feel like that's where like I find value as well. So yeah, like hopefully I think this was a really great chat. Like, I certainly know that my audience are going to get a lot out of it. So, yeah, hopefully your
Well,
audience does as well.
yeah, when you get people who can waffle and we can waffle, you don't really need to prepare much. But then there's some people out there, especially the more careful and nerdy types who have really good golden nuggets, and they get a bit nervous because they haven't been on a podcast before. It's like, yeah, we need to prepare for them. But I knew that we'd be fine waffling. Well, do you want to risk getting cancelled with one more question?
Go for
I
it.
joke
Cancel
about
me.
that.
Cancel me. What's your opinion on on this particular group of people? No,
who are you voting for in the American general election?
Yeah, exactly.
No, okay. So we both resonated on this post, and it's good that it's the end of the podcast because the only people listening are people who actually like us still, and we're not going to get cancelled. And I joke about that because the reality is honestly most people don't care. It's just some very vocal people. But you put out on LinkedIn 2 days ago, I don't want to talk about breaking gender stereotypes in my podcast. Someone pitched me this topic recently, and then you said, "Here's why it wouldn't work." Why don't you keep talking about that? Why don't you think gender stereotypes and that kind of angle? Because I feel very strongly about this too, and I've had people talk about it, and it's probably a good time to talk about it as fellow podcasters. So, what was your thoughts that you wrote in that thing?
Well, so that's what we're going to talk about for 30 plus minutes. We're going to talk about breaking gender stereotypes. Like, that's what we're going to talk about. Like, no, that's so boring, man. I would much rather get on someone who is breaking stereotypes and then just talk to them about what they know and what they do. Like, for me, I'm very...
Amen, sister.
Yeah. I actually identify as a man, but
Sorry.
I think like for me that identity politics stuff is so uninteresting. And I said like a second post about it because okay, so my point is like I don't like virtue signaling. I think like when all that stuff is, they just want pats on the back. That's what it is, and it doesn't get us anywhere. There's real work that needs to be done in terms of like being kind to people and helping people and uplifting people. And it's not to be found in identity politics, I don't think. And I sort of done another post, I think it was either yesterday or today, where I said, like, identity politics, that might be important to some people, but for me, it's all kind of summed up by what a guy called Ramdas said. He's a really cool dude, and he said, are you in, like, he's looking into your eyes, right? And he says to you, are you in there? I'm in here. How did you get into that one? And that for me is a level I want to interact with people, is like, hey, you're in there and I'm in here. It's like that same living thing is in both of us, and now we get to rendezvous here today at this time together. That's a really special thing, and I can't see how like identity politics is helpful sometimes. Like I get how there are marginalized people, and I feel very strongly that we need to help people. I guess that my reaction is that sometimes it goes too far and separates people, and I think that, and I'm not the only one who thinks that. I think this is a cultural shift that's a little bit maybe wants to bring people back together again. And I'm also aware to say like, oh, I'm not totally against gender politics. Like, there are places for it. And again, it's like, I don't want to be prescriptive and be like, oh, it's all nonsense, because obviously like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and like there's been and Eddie Mabo, like there's so much room that needs to be, there's so much that needs to be done, but also you can do harm by taking action. It's not just inaction that can do harm. Taking action can also do harm as well.
Yes.
I don't know.
It's the
and
overzealous vegan.
Yeah, that. But and also, I'm cautious to put my neck out here because this isn't the hill I'm willing to die on either. Like, if someone else has another idea, I'd like to listen. I'm not going to be like, no, you're wrong. I'm right. This isn't. I haven't even formulated my thoughts properly here, so until I formulate my thoughts, I should probably not talk about it.
Well, I guess part of it is you need to talk to formulate it, and that's what podcasts are about. But here's what I feel on this subject, and I resonate very much with that. Your podcast is called Plants Grow Here. My podcast is called the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. I have a chronic autoimmune disease that meant I couldn't work for 2.5 years, and I still can't do normal things anymore, right? I do not have a podcast on people with chronic health conditions in the industry, right? But if somebody is talking about it and it comes up, we're going to talk about it. I have had this vivid memory, early on in the podcast, or not actually early on, but it was a while ago. We had somebody who is an expert in their field. I'm going to be vague on it, but they were an expert in their field, and they happened to be same-sex attracted, right? And we had them on the podcast, and it was a great podcast. And do you know what? Who they sleep with didn't come up on the podcast. Do you know why? Because it's called the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. Exactly. We have had, and no one has ever brought it up, but we have had multiple people on the podcast who are not straight, right? I'm just being vague here because I don't have anyone's permission to talk about this.
And you can't out
bring
them.
it up before.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested in doing that. Now,
yeah.
People don't know this. I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast before. And it's not because I'm trying to hide it. It's because it's a lawn and garden podcast. Yeah. But my dad is gay. People don't know that. Anyways,
and my dad's a farmer, and that's come up a couple of times. But
well, my dad's a scientist, and that's come up because he's an agricultural scientist, and it's relevant to the podcast. But who my dad sleeps with is not relevant to the podcast. I got a message from somebody once who said, I love the podcast. I wish you had more diversity on the podcast. And I was just like, it was like weeks after we had somebody who happened to be gay on the podcast, and they chose to not bring it up. And this is my point. And I've talked to somebody, I'm trying to be vague here, but I've talked to somebody who is LGBTQ plus. Sorry if I'm offending. I'm not trying to. But I've talked to somebody about that, and they 100% were on the same page as me. It's like, we're not, like, you go to the podcast to talk about gardening. If you want to go to a different podcast to talk about sexual preferences, or take religion, like, I'm a Christian. If somebody brings up religion in the podcast, I'll talk about it. And I'm not offended if somebody disagrees, or they're Muslim or atheist or agnostic. We'll talk about it, but it's going to be very brief. And it'll eventually get, like, I remember I talked to Jim Penman from Jim's Mowing. I said, who's your hero? And he said, Jesus of Nazareth. So that's how that came up. But I was expecting, Warren Buffett or someone in business. It wasn't a religiously charged question. So the point is, we're not, like, I've never asked somebody who they're going to vote for, but politics is important. I don't ask who people sleep with or what their religion is, because it's the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. And yours is plants grow here. And it's like, we're in a niche, and we just talk about the niche.
I think it's because in this day and age...
Sorry, you go.
I was going to say, I think it's because people want to know if you're with us or if you're against us. And that's kind of like the world they live in. It's that black and white thing again. They want that prescription of, can I feel safe around you or not? Whereas I don't see it like that. I see it's like we're all one body of humanity. And then it's like, I'm looking to rendezvous with you and see how we can uplift. And then I just don't see how me, like, getting on gender people or making that a huge topic. I just don't see how it's helpful. Certainly we need those podcasts, right? Like, those discussions should be had, but not on every single podcast. It's like, life is so rich and beautiful. It's like to take everything down to to view it through these levels. It's like wearing cellophane glasses, and now all I can see is the color yellow. Only yellow colors can get through to me. Whereas if I take off those glasses, I can actually see the beautiful diversity and richness in this world.
Yes. It's a judgment as well. And this is what comes, I've talked about this a few times with different controversial topics, is the overly zealous vegans, I think, did more harm to their cause than they did benefit. Because people started associating veganism with somebody who was a bit confronting on the subject, rather than the health benefits, or negatives, depending on what your view is. But the purported health benefits of veganism were kind of forgotten, because all people can remember is zealous, kind of judgy people. And they missed the point. And as a Christian, Christians have done that too. Religious people have certainly done that, where they're like,
and
they're so judgy. Exactly. And then,
it goes both ways. My father, my dad's a cattle farmer, right? And I think cattle is great. I think it's the best thing for the environment. And my brother's vegan, and he thinks cattle's not great. Do you know how often we argue about that? We probably had an argument about it when he was first vegan, like when we were like 13 or something. Like when he was 13, I was probably 16. But you know what? he eats the vegan meat. It gives me the poops, and then so I just eat meat, and then okay, where can we rendezvous? Like that's what I want to know. Like where can we meet? What is the
Yes.
level we can meet
Oh,
at?
good play of words there.
Yeah, yeah. Meat.
Did you even
right.
notice I did that?
The meeting place at the butcher's.
Yeah. No, look, it's like everybody knows I love KFC, so I'm not a vegan.
Yeah.
But look, at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I couldn't. What I'm getting at is it has never crossed my mind to go. This person is a woman. I should get her on the podcast because I need more women on the podcast. And by the way, I've asked a lot of women on the podcast who don't want to come on for whatever reason. I'm not judging them or whatever, but there's a lot of people I really wanted to talk to who were too busy, or they don't like the idea of podcasts, or they think I smell, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
probably the third one.
the idea, yeah, probably. Beard is too patchy, whatever it is. But the idea is I am just looking for people who I think will have a really interesting conversation, and it has never crossed my mind that I should or shouldn't get somebody on because of who they sleep with, what food they eat, what political opinion they have, what religious ideology they have. Couldn't care less. It's like I want to learn about pruning techniques with Daniel Fuller, and I still don't know who you sleep with, Daniel, and it couldn't. Actually, I do, because you told me on the phone before that you're having a baby.
Married to my beautiful wife, who is... We're 2 weeks away from having our first baby. So.
Congratulations. But I'm saying we got 2 hours in, and if I didn't have that conversation with you before, I still wouldn't have known.
Because I wasn't thinking about that. The whole time I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm in a straight heteronormative relationship. Like that wasn't going on while I was actually thinking about what we were talking about. So identity is a very important level. Like it is. Identity is an important level. Like I don't identify as like a white person, but I identify as Australian. Like that's a big part of my identity. Like there are some ways that I can relate to other Australians that I cannot relate to with people overseas. It's just a cultural thing. I don't know what it is. We all grew up watching the same shows. We all grew up. Most of us grew up in the suburbs, and most of us played some sort of sport, and most of us had the same conversations at school. And there's just something comforting about when you find especially when you're overseas and you find an Australian, you're like zoop, and you just go straight for them. If I'm sitting behind someone and they look like they're Asian and they have an Australian accent, I'm not thinking you're not Australian. I'm thinking Australian accent, you're one of us. That's just how, and I understand that for that Asian person, it may be different for them, and I'd like to honour that and also hold space for that too. But yeah, I mean, I guess both of our experiences would be valid, I suppose. And it sounds so corny to say that.
Well, I find I do that thing on YouTube. When I'll click on a YouTube video someone I haven't seen before, and I like hear an Australian accent, I'm like, oh, I already automatically like you more because it's just a comforting accent. I don't know. Call me a racist. I would also, if somebody ever calls me a racist, okay, here's a story that no one's going to care about, but I'm going to say it anyway. So when future accusations come, when I was
this
5 and 6.
This sounds bad, by the way.
I set this up terribly. This is the end of both our careers. No, it doesn't go that way. It's just by poor communication standards. I grew up, my parents were in the Solomon Islands, right? And believe it or not, I'm a very rare person that I went to a school when I was 5 years old. I was in pre-primary. I went to a school where I was the only white boy in the class, the whole class. And I got taken out of the school because none of the kids would play with me, right? Because I was the only white boy in the class. So if anybody is like, I don't know, I just object to the whole idea of people being like, because somebody could go on and go, you haven't had enough black people on the podcast. And it's just like, it's got nothing to do with anything like that. Like, and you have no idea how many women or black people or whatever you've asked on the podcast that decided it just wasn't for them. And anyways, please, people, all three of you who are doing this, just relax a bit. Yeah, exactly. Both of you who are listening.
Be one big happy family. Like everyone's gonna be different. Like also, like Aboriginal people don't all agree with each other. It's just like there's just diversity around the country that everyone everyone's different, and like, can that be okay? Like, and also, can it be okay that we disagree with each other? Like, there's a line. Like, you don't want to be spreading hate. Like, that's something I'm not going to be a part of. I'm not interested in hate.
Yeah, I agree.
I just wish, I don't
Well,
like
how about
gender.
we
I
make
don't like identity
unifying?
politics because I guess, well, let's just point it out. Like, for the identity politics, in 2024, there's it just depends on who you talk to as to who's on the top and who's on the bottom of the hierarchy. It's just an ugly conversation. I just would rather look into your eyes and say, how did you get into that one? Because I'm in here.
Let's make the unifying factor the fact that we all love plants and gardens and interested in soil.
What a note to end
and we
it
like
on.
I like making a lot of blueberries on my blueberry bush and having the straightest hedges the mind can conceive of and beautiful lush green lawn to kick the balls of foot on and enjoy my life that way. And we can all get around that and go, should we use anvil or bypass secateurs? Because we're stupid and nerdy and we care enough about that. And nobody else does. And the both of you still listening, hopefully you can both get around this. And well done for getting through that ramble of mess. Where can we find you, Daniel?
Oh my goodness, where can't you find me? I built a job board called hortpeople.com. I have a podcast called Plants Grow Here. I write articles for the Hort Journal. I write the careers column, and I also write Ausbreed plants for the Hort Journal. If you're a landscape architect, I can help you with your plant knowledge through Ausbreed. Reach out to me, horticulture@ausbreed.com.au, or reach out to me, hello@plantsgrowhere.com. But yeah, if you like podcasts and you like Luke's podcast, you're probably going to like mine. And if you like my podcast, you're probably going to like Luke's podcast. So we have different angles, but similar audience. You're more niche than me. I do like pretty much just garden industry, whereas I feel like you're more particularly like garden and like lawn. Like I do feel like, and also more business ownery sort of thing. But
yes, so definitely what we do that you don't do is the business owner stuff. And we do quite
also
a bit
personal
of that.
stories. You get to meet the people behind the tools, whereas we don't really talk about people on my podcast. So I think that's a nice human element on yours.
We overlap in the nerdy deep dive subject stuff, but that's probably 20% of what I do. And it's so if you like the nerdy deep dive stuff, which I do, jump on Plants Grow Here, and you've got more episodes than me. So if people have run out of Luke's episodes, you've got 200 and something of Daniel's episodes, and there we go. We'll get you on again. Definitely, and I think I'm going on yours to talk about lawn at some stage.
Yeah.
So, but people, thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Daniel, for coming on, and everybody else. We'll see you in the next podcast.
Thank you, everybody.